Hello, 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 and welcome to Project Possible with me, Rich Leigh. Today I'm talking to Dr. Susie Bennett. Susie is one of the preeminent researchers into male suicide in the world. With those words said, with the title scene, with the description scene, it goes without saying that we're going to be talking about some pretty deep and sensitive topics. So if that's not your bag, see you next week. If it is, and you want to get to know more about, I guess, men's mental health in general, and what Susie's incredible, vast research says about that, mixed with, and it is obviously going to be paired with, for regular viewers and listeners that know about my brother's suicide last year, with some sensitive and personal kind of introspection. That's what you're going to expect. That's what you can expect from this episode. Data, science, facts, figures, but also the reality of the situation and Susie's wonderful, beautiful sensitivity. Honestly, just a wonderful human dedicating herself to something absolutely incredible. And for, as far as I can tell, to the detriment of her life financially at the very least. So we should be incredibly grateful that people like Susie exist. Dr. Susie, thank you. Government, shame on you. Step up more. Support people. With all that said, all that remains to be said is, without further ado, I bring to you my conversation with Dr. Susie Bennett. Susie, I'm excited about this one. And it's a strange topic and conversation possibly to be excited about for reasons it will become very clear. But I am. It's so lovely to meet you. For those that don't know, can you tell us who you are, what you do, just a tiny bit of kind of, I guess, biographical background?
Sure. So, I'm Susie, and I am a researcher at the University of Glasgow, and my research topic is suicide in men. And that's been a topic I've been researching since 2018. It's about 8 years now. And I've been really lucky the last 2 years to have funding from Man Up to continue that work. They're a men's mental health charity. And we, Rich, there's so many questions that we have to explore. And it's this, I cannot understand. I will tell you the words, but I cannot understand them, of the situation of the rates of male suicide that we see, not just in this country, but around the world, and that we've seen that historically. So you sort of put that up there. And then the research outputs to understand that is so out of kilter with the scale of the problem.
And I think the scale, just to say it in a sentence, and I've heard you say this, I've heard our mutual friend George say this, until I hit 50, I'm the most likely risk to my own life.
Yeah.
As a man, in this country particularly, until I'm 50 years old, the most likely way that I die is by my own hand. Mm. That's the scale of it. And, we can get into the numbers and I guess just before we started, I did say to you, maybe I bring some of the anecdotal and some of the, some of the colour, and you can bring some of your, the conversations you've had, the wisdom of suicidal men. I want to get into all of that type of stuff. But it is a difficult topic. If people are going to switch off, they've already switched off. So that's the wonderful thing. If you're here with us right now, I'm not going to look into the camera like Ricky Gervais, but if you're here with us, you're here for a reason. When you introduce yourself as Susie, you're Dr. Susie Bennett.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, so your PhD was in this research, male suicide. Talk to me about why.
Yeah. It's, prior to doing my first study, suicidal pain, suicide attempts, thoughts and feelings have been in my family for a long time. And I have to say, at the point that I started my research, I hadn't connected with the fact that I've also had those thoughts and feelings, right. But I hadn't labelled them to myself as suicidal. So, or that was what I was feeling, which seems like a sort of strange thing to say now, because that's exactly what was happening. But I think I basically came into the work as a ball of pain. And I had to put that pain, that rage, that frustration, that sadness, because, I'd experienced as well as a loved one, the I don't say this lightly, but the trauma of trying to find help for somebody and not having the help available, because when it's somebody that you love most in the world and you're worried about them staying in existence and you're trying to get help to keep them there and not being able to find it is a really intense set of psychological conditions to kind of be
it almost trumps everything else, doesn't it?
It consumes everything.
It consumes you, and like you say, that as regular listeners, viewers will know about having lost my brother Jordan to suicide last year, February 7th, 2025. Jordan was 27. I very much relate to that feeling of hopelessness, and a system that in a system in a society where we talk about men need to talk. That boy had so much therapy. Right. I can't tell you. In a system where, like men need to do X. It's like, I'm kind of sick of talking. I'm kind of sick of the slogans and the social media hashtags and all these things. So like, do you know what? And we'll get into what support is and isn't there, and the lengths that you go to and all those things. Just for the moment, obviously, I just want to set things up. But we will get into that, as you rightly said. It's all consuming. It does. You just don't know, whether to turn left or right, and what you can do for that person, and do they need or want this support, or will they accept that support if there was support there? Very often that support falls through or isn't there in the first place. Talk to me about you mentioned
prior to that.
So and I mean prior to that. So you touched
44.
on. You're 44.
Yeah.
So you've had a life. 2008. You'd had a professional life up to that point. What were you doing before that?
So I worked for the charity sector before that. So I worked for various charities, but the charities I loved, and this theme echoes in the work that I do now, has always been about charities that support people living an experience, living a reality, supporting them to determine the changes that need to happen in their life, and trying to get them the tools that they need to make those things happen. So you're right
on the ground floor with these people.
Exactly. For me, it's all about, I can't say what your experience in the world is, Rich, or the things that you might need to make your life softer or more bearable. I can only work out those things in conversation with you. And so for me, it's that I've just never understood an approach that doesn't centre lived experience. I just don't see how that can meaningfully kind of reveal that much. So for me, I had a very formative experience, not to take us too much off field, but...
Hey, I love tangents. I love tangents, Susie. They'll come with us.
So my maternal grandparents were both Jewish refugees, so they came to the UK in 1939 separately.
Wow.
But lost lots of their family in the Holocaust. So I knew from a young age that the majority of my ancestors on that side of my family had been murdered for, reasons of hate. And so I always had this feeling like I was somehow how to describe it, like that the Nazis hadn't succeeded because I was here, and I was somehow a legacy for my ancestors, and that I was always very aware of wanting to honour them.
That's a powerful, hopeful way of looking at it.
Yeah, it was, and that's it. I always felt that really, really, really deeply. And sometimes. So I went when I was in my mid-20s. I went and spent time in Israel, Palestine, and met local peace-building organisations. Had a transformative experience spending time with Palestinian people, Rich, who were the greatest people that I've ever met in my life, and they really, really showed me that people that have nothing in a material sense, in a sense of safety and freedom, there was so much generosity of spirit and love, and emotionally I felt unbelievably safe spending time there. And so it was really, it taught me so much that I see in this work as well. When I go, I speak often about the power of community interventions, men's spaces, men's groups, just ordinary men wanting to take care of each other in their communities. For me, it's absolutely, that's been the medicine that's kept humans kind of our heads above water. So for me, that's always been a really, really kind of special ingredient, and one of the things that makes me feel kind of redemptive about, it's so easy to look at the world now and just be in horror, and it's difficult with aspects of this work, Rich, where you're speaking, sort of what you touched on earlier, people, men that want help and the help isn't necessarily available, or there's sometimes the thing that I find frustrating is I think that there's this idea that there's some kind of simple fix to suicidal pain, and actually it's each of us, Rich, you're on a lifetime journey, I'm on a lifetime journey of managing me and the things that happen to me, and keeping trying to keep this ship on course. So it's not that that's unique to people who are suicidal, but there's often added luggage on their ship as to why that may become more difficult in terms of navigating your path. So it's not that there can be one intervention, one thing that happens, and then suddenly.
Well, I wanted to bring up, and the only note I have of this is "It's a Wonderful Life."
Right.
Now, it feels an appropriate moment to bring it up then, because what happens in "It's a Wonderful Life," and why is Scrooge and "It's a Wonderful Life," why are they two of the most powerful, best loved stories, in and around Christmas? It's redemption. It's that one moment where the light bulb flicks and he goes, "I do want to live. Yeah. I do want to be a good person."
Yeah.
Now, I do want to live. So one of the most famous, beloved films of all time centers around suicide, and the fact that this man is or isn't. He's like, "Well, I'm going to do it. I don't want to be here anymore," and it's just that. Yeah, it's that wonderful Hollywood notion of that flick switch moment. And oh gosh, no, I do want to be alive. Isn't life wonderful? It's a wonderful life. It's like, that's not how life works. And if it is, it's not for any length of time. You touched on there, that lifetime journey. Life is not a straight line. The older I'm getting, I'm 38 now. The older I'm getting, and the more water that passes under the bridge, and the older my kids get, and the more I see my family grow around me, and things happen. You just go, it's not a straight line. You can't plan for it. You think you can. How conceited to think that we can plan for this, and to think that exactly, right, okay, well, because you're given the building blocks at a young age. Okay, well, this happens and this happens and this happens, and it's marriage and kids and or education, then uni, then all these things. Well, not everybody has those things, especially people from backgrounds that are atypical, possibly. But yeah, I just thought, as I said, it's all I've literally got I've got tons of notes.
Right.
It's just, it's a wonderful life. Just to touch on, I think, for the audience, just as much as to introduce you to the conversation, that idea that, why is that such a beloved film? Well, it's because it's an easy answer to a complex question. And all of a sudden, life's brilliant. It's perfect. He sees it clearly. It's funny how that's almost a framework that people might then use for suicide and suicidal ideation, and then okay, well, it's just easy, just fix it, just think about all the wonderful things, just think about how grateful you are. How selfish of you not to be grateful. It's like, well, again, it's not always that easy. I want to get to you though, particularly why 2018, why academia? So you spent this time in charity, and we always that kind of kid. We always that kind of, I'll give you the shirt off my back type kid.
Yeah, I was. I think not necessarily. What I would describe myself as a kid was I was always worried about people being alone with their pain. That was the thing that really, really, I hated seeing kids in the playground that weren't playing with people, and like that, and I'd sort of try and go and.
Is that something you experienced personally?
Not at school, but at home I felt, not that I didn't have people that loved me, and but there was a degree of complexity of things going on where I felt alone with certain experiences, and I couldn't bear the thought of other people going through the same. So that was always kind of, and I fucking love Rich. I to some extent, I love the energy when you meet somebody and they go, I want things to be different. Like even though the road ahead may be really, really long, really, really difficult, but like I want, for me, it's such a precious energy, and I want to help grow that small spark that somebody may feel inside of themselves to become kind of bigger and bigger. Because also, Rich, so often the reason why life has you on your knees has come from, its roots are often in external places, and you've inherited an idea of yourself and who you are in this world because of the pain sometimes of other people. And when you see and you meet these beautiful men, and often, there's complicated things, difficult things that have gone on in their childhood that have shaped an idea of themselves and who they are, who they can be, and they've never had a chance to breathe, So yeah, just going back to your earlier point of like, as a kid, I was always somebody that was like really, I just worried about people, I suppose, and worried about people at home, and just I was I was anxious through my skull. I was just like vibrating with anxiety as a child.
Did you do anything about that feeling? If you saw somebody alone, were you the person to go and say, "Hey, let's play"?
Yeah, I remember incidences of like trying and going and talking to people. I remember it was similar with my brothers. I would see them. I remember once somebody in my brother's year was kind of getting picked on. I remember in the playground watching my younger brother step in and be like, kind of not on my watch. So it was kind of like a bit of a family thing. But I think my overriding feeling of childhood was just one of massive anxiety and lots of OCD and
was it
wired.
Not that there was anything such as a typical upbringing, but was quite a typical upbringing. Mum, dad, what did they do? What was the setup at home?
My mum was a special needs teacher, so my mum is unbelievably she's just got a heart that cries for everybody. Do you
think you inherited some of that?
I think to some extent, she grew up in a very complicated situation. Both her parents were foreigners to this country. Both her parents were living with unbelievable trauma of having family members murdered, the experience of seeing your community turn against you and having to flee your country. And then both her parents died quite young.
Where did they flee from?
So my grandmother from Vienna in Austria, and my grandfather was originally from a town in Romania, which is now part of Ukraine. And then they met in London in the 40s. It was. The thing is, Rich, like as a kid, you think you're. You don't know any different, so you're just kind of. I think it's only sort of in adulthood that you can start to look back and kind of maybe process things that you think. I think it's so difficult if a child doesn't feel safe for some reason, and it doesn't understand. It's trying to. It doesn't have the tools yet. I didn't have the understanding of the world to process that. So you're having to create all of these weird compensatory kind of survival skills to kind of, navigate your way out of things. So one of the things I would do as a kid was I'd have this thing where I'd have to touch things. And if I touched them, nothing bad was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I remember once having by myself, just a complete breakdown because I was trying to leave my parents' bedroom. I'd gone in there to get something, and then it had taken me like 15 minutes. I couldn't get out because I was just having to go around touching things.
Remember how old you were?
I can't remember, no.
Are we talking under 10, teenager?
I really can't remember. I would say maybe 11 or 12. And I remember just breaking down in the room, like crying because I was so fucking frustrated. I was just like, I want to leave this room. And then actually we went on I think we were at Butlins or somewhere. And I remember my older brother was doing kick-me-ups. And I was watching him do it, and I could see his face was kind of getting purple as he was doing it. He was getting more and more kind of distressed. And I was like, JJ, what's going on? And he was like, and he said to me, and I remember this so clearly, he said, I've got to do 10 in a row or something awful is going to happen to someone. And I remember when he told me that, Rich, I was like, thank God. Thank God it's not just on me. It's not just my responsibility to be keeping the kind of like, and I didn't even know, it's like you were chasing this shadow or something. But I remember feeling really a relief that it wasn't just kind of my responsibility. And this is why they do, sometimes Rich in research, they do these sort of comparisons, like if you have a sibling, then somehow environmentally you've grown up in the same environment, so it's a good comparison. But I always think children have completely me and my siblings did not have the same childhood.
Being one of 5, everyone was different.
And your role in the family, so my brother being the older brother, the responsibility, like I had someone I could look to and go, you're my point of safety. Whereas, I think anyway, I think every childhood is different.
It's fascinating that your mum worked in special needs at a time where, let's be honest, it probably would have been pushed to one side predominantly. So when would she have worked? 80s, 90s?
Yeah, I guess 70s, 80s, 90s. She
not
was
a time
noughties,
that it would probably be not, probably wouldn't have been the most supported of career choices. Cause my brother, just below me, is autistic. Ended up at a special needs school, which was the best place in the world for him.
Yeah,
he was at a few state schools first, kept getting expelled. Ended up in a reintegration centre, and then flourished at a special needs school. Absolutely flourished. He was exactly where he needed to be.
Yeah,
because I think, when was this? So this would have been kind of mid 2000s, when I think there was a bit more of a kindness and an understanding of, okay, well, he's not just being naughty. He's not just being a problem. There's something, there's some support that he needs that we're not giving him. And I mean, I hasten to add that I think 20 years later, we're far too quick to diagnose that the other way now and say, oh, no, they don't need to go to class. They don't need to go to and kind of overdiagnose, misdiagnose, or, over kind of therapize. We touched on that just before we started speaking. I think that children, there's almost a want to be those things, to have a label of some of those things today, that having seen the mess that is the special needs system, and the support and the time even that it took him to get the support he needed, I think now there are parents that are absolutely clogging the system with children that don't need that support. And people can go in the comments and call me a dick for all they want. It's happening. We know it is. Honestly, tell me that out of 100 kids, 100 of those people need that support. That is poorly funded, or has been traditionally poorly funded. We'll get onto funding in mental health, and where there's only a finite amount of money. It can only go in so many different ways. I'd argue this is just as important a topic as special needs and those things, and not to get diverted by it here, but again, we talked about lived experience. I've seen it. I know that these systems are clogged full of parents that think that it might make their child's life just that tiny bit easier to get that that diagnosis. So then very often they go and get it privately assessed.
Right, okay.
What's the incentive for a private person?
Yeah.
Give you the answer that you want.
Yeah.
Fast track a system. Again, that might well get edited out because it's a personal point of frustration for me. Or again, it isn't, and people in the comments call me a knob. But, worse things have been said. So I'm getting a picture as to you as a person. You didn't mention your dad. What did your dad do?
He was a surveyor.
Okay.
So he was in the building industry. Quantitative? I don't know. He used to go around building sites and say how much it was going to cost.
Right. This many bricks, that many things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a picture of compassion, concern for others, a will to do something about it, And the only thing I'm not getting is why men? And I realise that we're kind of 20, 30 minutes into the conversation here, but why particularly men? Because you said that there was some kind of suicidal kind of complications within the family in terms of ideation, that sort of thing. We all know that it's men, that do commit the majority of suicides. Why did it take you down that path? How from charity work did you get into academia?
So for me, I went into this. I was studying a master's at the time, and I thought I was doing this master's in social and cultural psychology. So it's basically looking at how societies and cultures, the ideas, norms, attitudes, belief, affect how we as individuals think and behave. And I thought I was just going to understand that process better so that I could go back to the charity sector. My job in the charity sector was just getting people to care about things, to want to support them, find out more about them.
Do you mind me asking in what space it was?
The longest role I had was for a disability rights organisation that supports disability activists in Africa and Asia. So people that were really facing huge amounts of stigma and challenges, and but also, I was really lucky that I'd been on a few trips to go and meet activists. This is what I love what the human spirit is capable of. When you look at some of the ways in which men are told in societies that you have social value, which is by achieving potentially certain markers of things that I think do not fill you up.
Very often capitalistic markers.
Yeah.
And again, I can say
will
that
leave you very hungry.
For me, financial security was everything.
Of course, 100%.
Because it doesn't take a psychologist to say, hey, Rich, I can understand why, given upbringing. So financial security was everything.
But going to this question of why men, so basically I'd gone to do this master's in psychology thinking I want to go back to the charity sector and have a bit more understanding of the science behind why people care about what they do. And I basically just fell in love with studying. It was such a joy. And then it came to picking my dissertation topic, and I was like, I want to do something I want to do a topic that fills me up. I want to do something that speaks to, a kind of question of my soul. And so, like I said, because as a family, we'd had these experiences of suicidal crises, and then also it was around the time in 2018 that the Me Too movement was happening. There was this real kind of tidal wave of rage, I suppose, towards men, and this idea that men were, male privilege and male power. And I remember seeing the statistic around suicide being the biggest killer of men under 50, and I thought, well, this one narrative of men as privileged and powerful, and this other narrative of men, the biggest thing that's going to kill a man is a death by despair before he's 50. There's this huge piece of the story that's missing. And I always, Rich, I've spoken about this a lot. I am here because of the love of my brothers. I was so, for the things that may have been challenging in childhood, to be surrounded by male energy, because we were four of us kind of 3.5 years apart. And I just adored them. And I knew that they adored me. I knew that I was deeply, and I still am deeply loved by my brothers. And I think if you're lucky enough to have that feeling, particularly as a woman, as a sister, it sets you up for life on a level of when I meet throughout my life, when I meet a man, I'm expecting him to treat me as my brothers have treated me.
It's a high expectation, isn't it?
Yeah, they're my template.
That's your standard.
Yeah, and I'm so lucky in that way to have had that experience, particularly with my older brother. He was absolutely always been my point of safety, and he.
I should say I met him just before we started recording. Met JJ, met Jonathan, and what was the last thing you said as we just thanks for tidying up, Jonathan. Cheers, JJ. Thanks for tidying up. So he's looking after you.
Yeah, he tidied up in here before you came. Bless him. So yeah, it's so I had this deep love of men, and a lot of my childhood, Rich, I was immersed in male energy. So my childhood was spent, we played football all the time. We were football fucking crazy, and I was the biggest football nut out of all of us because I just absolutely loved it. Was obsessed with my team, Liverpool, and certain players, John Barnes, Peter Beardsley, Ian Rush. Absolutely adored them.
Do you still support them just as ardently now?
Oh, I've it's other than working, it's like the biggest thing that I do in my life.
So hang on, who else? Would Ian Rush have been around? Ian Rush would have been
John
around.
Barnes was a big
John
one
Barnes
for
was the big
me
one.
because he then did.
Can you do the rap?
Rich, that was it for me. I was like, this is the fucking coolest
The rap happened,
person
you're
that's ever lived. I will do anything for this man. And then weirdly enough, my brother Simon, before the season before we won the league, he brought me a little tiny figurine of John Barnes, and he was like, this is your lucky charm, this is your season now. And then in that was a season where we won it after 30 years. So
what year was that? Can you remember?
I think it was 2019,
Yes.
2019, 2020, because
Yeah.
it was in lockdown. But yeah, so football for me, Rich, is a really fascinating space. Like I when people say men aren't emotional, I think go to the football. I used to go when I was doing my PhD. We had a Liverpool supporters group that would meet at this pub in Glasgow. It was quite a small room, and there was loads of us packed in. And Rich, the emotion in that room was so.
For me, there's that wonderful thing about sport, and I've touched on football, rugby, insert sport here. Typically, one of the big ones, football, where men can literally, and actually no, I'll reframe that. Sports fans can sit, and I could just say a name, and you go, ah, yeah, and then you'll say a name, and I go, ah, yeah, and we could just bond like that.
Saying the names.
We don't even need to say words. We just,
Yeah.
with rugby, if I just pull a name out, Serge Simon, old Gloucester player, there'll be a certain age matter, about my age and a bit older maybe, that go, Serge Simon, what a pull, and it's just, I adore it. I adore that kind of that male energy. And again, being in and around rugby teams my whole life, I love that male energy as well, as you say, and tell me that there's no emotion in the rugby changing room. Tell me that these aren't men supporting each other. And
God,
you get the silliness and the bravado and the the tall tales and the Jay from the in-betweeners type moments, and you're like, oh, that didn't really happen though, did it, mate? Whatever. But some of those moments are absolutely golden, and you meet those people 15, 20 years later, and they're still powerful. So
sacred spaces can be. Yeah.
So you grew. So football for you is
football for me, and then we did all sort. And we fought, Rich. I was speaking to someone about this the other day because we were talking about like ways in which you regulate your emotions. And I was saying, as a kid, we would have a fucking smackdown. Do you know what I mean? And like, obviously, but it was contained, safe violence because we were never going to cross the line with it. But like, we'd irritate each other, and then we would wrestle. Yeah. And then it was gone. Yeah. And then we carried on, and it was like, and I was saying to someone, I kind of miss that. Sometimes I just want to. Yeah. And actually during my PhD, I went to join a local boxing club, which was amazing. Like, it was such, again, just being in a space of male energy, and, and I love, obviously everything has extremes. It's like banter can go to really dark places, but there's a kind of banter that you get in male spaces I absolutely adore. And I remember my boxing coach used to be like, oh, look out, Ninja Susie's coming, and I was fucking shit, Rich. Everyone there knew I was fucking shit, so but it just made me feel like that sort of silly, the silliness that's full of warmth.
You're in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm in, and that's such a feeling of. It's a feeling that we're all searching for in different ways in our lives.
Community and belonging is enormous, and we'll get into isolation and male loneliness and those sorts of things. And I apologise, I don't know how many. I mean, you've done a lot of interviews, lots of podcasts. I don't know how many are focused on the why up top. Hopefully, like I have, because to me it matters, because it infers and involve every aspect of you and what you do and what we talk about next. I now will see it in a very different light to what I otherwise would have done.
Yeah,
So thank you
yeah.
for sharing, because it's fun. Now I just think of you as Ninja Susie. So just don't batter me, all right? Listen, I'm
I think
tired.
you're safe, Rich. Yeah.
So your academic work,
Yeah.
you so 2018
I did.
was when
Yeah.
you started your PhD.
It was when I did my study for my master's.
Right.
So I did 32 interviews with men that had attempted suicide or had thoughts of suicide, or people bereaved by male suicide.
Now, 32 men. That cannot have been easy to find 32 people that were open to and quite happy to speak about their experiences, or was it?
It wasn't difficult, Rich.
Really?
And this is the thing that's been consistent throughout my work is feeling a hunger from people that they want to talk about this, and this really, really beautiful energy that exists within people that can be living incredibly brutal, difficult lives. This beautiful energy of wanting to help, even if it comes from a place of feeling I don't think I can be helped, but I want to tell you my story in the hopes that it's going to help other people. I said to someone the other day, that is the most of all the messages and emails that I get from people, from men, that is almost what they'll always sign off around that idea of how can I help?
Yeah.
And that for me is extraordinary. That for me is the magic of being a human being. What's beautiful about us as a species, not to say we're the only ones that help, but that it's a really, I think, such a powerful fuel, a powerful
I guess when you feel
energy.
like a lack of hope, the only hope you can maybe give is to others. And
Absolutely.
that's, maybe in some small way I can be of service outside of myself, because I'm clearly not being of service to myself right now. So maybe I can be useful. Not for the first time. I feel glassy-eyed even thinking about that, just thinking about my brother and the things that he wanted to do to help others in his most despairing of moments. So again, that will happen dozens of times, I'm sure, during this conversation. So thank you. So 32 conversations.
Life-changing conversations, which I have to say.
I want to get into them.
Yeah.
But so that was your master's, finished your PhD, still in and around this space.
Yes. So basically I finished the master's and I was like, I've scratched the surface of what's going on here. And I describe it as being, Rich, I was when your dog picks up a scent in the woods and they're gone, like that was me mentally, emotionally. I left my life as I knew it previously because I was absorbed in this scent and I was gone.
Would you go as far as to say it's a passion? Would you say
it was just all consuming? It was like a drug, and there was this deep sense, I suppose, of realizing, and this was over the course of many years of like, I don't know men at all. I don't know them at all. And this work was sort of revealing to me more and more the depths of the male experience that I just hadn't had been brought into contact with as somebody. And I always say that I was someone that thought they were. So that was the big shock for me. And I really encourage to women listening that is for me personally has been one of the biggest kind of learnings from the work is how little I kind of understood the male experience, and like I say, this hunger to be heard and to speak about their lives. So it was a real and so basically, sorry, Rich. Then after that I was like, I can't leave this. So I then went and did my PhD. I didn't get funding for it, so I then had to fundraise. I sent out probably 1,000 letters, funding packs, emails to people. I got 2 responses from family trusts that had lost sons to suicide, so the Leigh and Britton Foundation and Jonathan's Voice. So Liam and Jonathan, for me, have been huge energetic presences in my life, and I've been really, so that covered, the funding from them ended up covering probably roughly a third of the PhD costs.
How much is a PhD?
It costs about the fees for my PhD were £12,000, but then you've got to live each month.
Sure.
So most people, when they get funding, they get a stipend of about £1,500, but I was having to work doing charity job, consultancy stuff, to then so I was balancing doing the PhD as much as I could and working to live, which was really very, very intense, I have to say. But the bit of funding that I did get from Jonathan's Voice and Leigh in Britain was so powerful, because I don't know how to say this beyond that. I felt them with me, and I felt their guardianship around the work. And I felt, going back again to thinking about me as a kid and feeling like I am somehow the legacy of my ancestors and wanting then to honour them. This was like almost that again, of now this money that I have is part of the legacy of Jonathan and of Liam, and how do I honour that? And I still think about them absolutely, every day. It's always moved me so much. So there's this beautiful man called Jeff, who's Liam's father, and he set up the Leigh in Britain Foundation. And just before Liam died, Jeff and his two sons went to walk a mountain in just outside of Glasgow, and he calls it Liam's Hill. And and every year since Liam died, he'd go and walk that hill. And I happened to email him about my funding request on the day that he was walking Liam's Hill, and saying to him, I've got this place at the University of Glasgow. So he's from Newcastle originally. He's just outside of Glasgow. He's walking Liam's Hill. And so it was this kind of really, I don't know words to put around it, Rich, but it was a real feeling of
serendipity.
Yeah.
So much of life is timing.
Yeah.
So much of everything is time. I'm finding that with this, and the conversations that I have, and the people that I meet along the way, and the people that I don't meet, but then in 6 months' time, like as in, they've been guests at, okay, well, not now, but in next time, and then I meet them, and I'm glad for the time that it took to meet them, because there's been an experience or two in between that changed the conversation even.
Yeah.
So much of life is timing and putting yourself out there, and saying yes, and and all these things. So did you get? You said it was about a third of your funding.
Yeah,
was kind of supported by them, and then the rest was you working.
Yeah,
and bloody, it's not easy, right? To do a PhD, and
it's not easy, and I guess in some way it's not easy to do a PhD on this topic, because also like emotionally it was quite.
Is it the case? And I'm not the most academic man in the world. I didn't go to university. I dropped out at A-levels and had a kid at 18. But I'm not thick. But PhD. Is it that you have to do something unique? So something that's not been...
You've got to contribute a unique piece of research, yeah.
So can you remember what yours was called? What was the title of your... is it a thesis, is that?
A thesis, yeah. I think because it's academia, you do something... It's something really boring and
Go
dry.
on, hit me.
I can't remember what my PhD thesis... I remember my master's dissertation I called The Plight of Man. Mm-hmm. But basically, I was looking very broadly... So, Rich... I always make this comparison that I think it was 1851, something like that. They started recording suicide deaths in this country. Maybe it's 1861. But anyway, every year since then, there have been more male deaths by suicide recorded. So we've known this for, a long, long period of time. We're starting research at 1861. We're starting from this very broad level of like men, whereas actually men are unbelievably diverse and different and complicated. So my research was basically looking very broadly at the factors that might be putting men at risk and the factors that might support men in learning to manage and cope with suicidal pain. And I did 4 different studies to kind of explore that. And then going back again to not finding it difficult to find participants, I generated so much data from that PhD that I've still for the last 2 years had studies to be writing up that looking at different aspects of all of those kind of questions. The last 2 years I got funding from Man Up, from this men's mental health charity. So they've given me for the last 2 years funding. And then my funding runs out next month. So I don't actually know next month. I don't have an income as of next month. So it's always been that kind of level of precariousness. So, and you have to be, I'm somebody I need something that fills me up. Otherwise, I'm mentally in so much trouble. Like living a life where I haven't been filled up I'm breathing despair on a daily basis. Like I don't function well in it.
Do you feel the weight of that in a month's time funding runs out?
Yeah, I'm definitely...
Are you at the minute, and again, this can get edited out, I'm just interested in you and how you're feeling
Rich,
right now.
I'm shitting myself.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's really, because I'm 44... I don't have a house. I don't have I'm not at that point of having financial security. And also a lot of people, you maybe feel this as well, all of my siblings struggle. So there's not that feeling of, I feel like I'm worried for everybody's kind of long-term future as well, and being, it's really difficult, Rich. And I don't talk about that too much because... whatever, but like, because the job is emotionally
how do you switch off? How
consuming.
do you kick back and like how do you chill out?
This is why the football is magical, because it is a ongoing distraction. But having the kind of emotional demands of the job and then the financial pressures of like but I am in the processes at the moment of setting up a charity. So I've got an application in with the Charity Commission to try and set up a centre for male suicide research that can then also not only generate research and evidence, but also start doing projects about how do we translate that research and evidence into tangible action. Like how do we start improving services and improving what's available, all kinds of things. So I've got kind of like ambitious plans, but I don't know how to enact them.
It shouldn't be the case that somebody in your position where, as a researcher of male suicide, you're effectively doing this literally, like month to month, concerned for this is such an enormous issue that impacts us on such a huge scale, both individually in the way that it has me, my family, my brother, and then as a society. It breaks me that you're even concerned about, wages and things like that, because it's such an enormous thing. It's like, why is this not funded? It's such a high level so that people like you that are dedicating their careers and their lives to this can be comfortable in doing so. I don't make any false equivalences here, but there will absolutely be things that are funded and people are
some bullshit that gets
some academic funding,
some absolute bullshit.
Like, does that matter in the grand scheme of this many men are taking their own lives, and for what reason? And is that not something we need to solve? Because let's take it from that I touched earlier on, capitalistic kind of economic perspective. If those people aren't exiting the job market, the careers pool, then we're making more money. So at least think of it like if you need to be Scrooge about this.
Yeah,
think of it like that.
If you want to look at it through capitalistic terms,
then go stop these people, exiting the the career pool, and there's more money in the economy. That's a ridiculous way of looking at it, but it's a way of going. Let's because it's hard to quantify, justify funding. Get that, or not quantify, but justify funding. But surely at some point, human life and the work of someone like you needs to be considered properly. Let's get into your field of folk. Your the things that I don't.
Okay. Yeah.
You talked to 32 men for your masters. Yeah. How many people do you think you spoke to for your PhD?
We got data from over 3,000 men around the world.
So it was 32 conversations like this, was it?
Interviews, and then we did big surveys open to men around the world in English language. So it was. restricted in that way. Asking about all things like childhood experiences,
Sure.
Loneliness, how you think and feel about yourself, relationship with emotions, suicidal thoughts and feelings, mental health, and then I've done collaborations with starting to do like looking internationally, because the other thing, Rich, is that suicide is everywhere.
It does not
Discriminate.
It does not discriminate. Yeah, and that's across, race, gender, socioeconomic class, all of these things. That's one thing that we do know. Yes, of course, we'll get into childhood adversity and those experiences that might contribute, but Christ, it's one of those things. It's like it's that grim reaper tapping on your shoulder just constantly. Like that you're the black dog. It's that notion, right? What do you think people most misunderstand about the men that you sit with?
It's a great question. It's hard to know, because I don't know what what other people are thinking, and I think nobody maybe says to me anymore what they might, their assumptions. But I guess how I would answer that, Rich, in a way, what I would say, that prior to doing this work, it really, I should say, since doing this work, it's made me realise that prior to doing this work, so let's say you and I have just met. Prior to doing this work, I would have read you in a much more two-dimensional way. It's not to say that I wouldn't have had warm feelings to you or whatever, but I wouldn't necessarily be the part of my brain that's kind of putting together a feeling for like I'm in awe, Rich, of what you've endured and come through, and I have a deep respect for the fucking mountain that you've climbed to be able to be, sat here now. And I think that I have a much more, there's much more wholeness now to how I meet men. And I talk all the time about this idea called gamma bias that John Barry and Martin Seeger developed. And it's this idea that all the things that we think and feel are so often shaped by the messages that we absorb from the societies, cultures, communities, families, workplaces around us. And they propose this idea that our collective empathy is shaped by these gender norms. So if we as a society are often told a narrative of men do harm, men have power, men are privileged, then we are much more likely to see men in that way. And we don't as often hear the message of men have been and are being deeply harmed. Lots of men don't have power in lots of areas of their life. Lots of men have not been privileged.
I remember when I first heard the term male privilege, and particularly white male privilege.
Yeah.
And I was possibly in my 20s, and maybe late teens, 20s, and it was laughable to me.
Of course.
Because, it was like, you think that, I was just about to give it a specific example, financially particularly, but, the violence, the drugs, the insert things here of the upbringing, it's like, that's what privilege looks like to you.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm white and straight and male, then, and it's almost like privilege to people with privilege looks like, basically, if it's visual. It's like, I can tell you're privileged. Why? Because I can just see it. It's like, that's not what it is. I always say to, one of my friends, like, if you put our lives side by side to each other, you black guy, and I said, if you put our lives side by side, I guarantee that they'd pick my life as yours, as your upbringing.
Right.
Guarantee it. And he's like, yeah. It's a bloody lovely life.
Yeah.
I said, now what does that tell you? It tells you these bloody idiots that are so obsessed with privilege and, like the haves and the have-nots. The people that have the biggest problem with this as a topic are the ones that they see colour. It's not content of character. Right. It's far more, colour of skin.
Yeah.
And, they'll find themselves in these, almost racist moments or these moments where they misunderstand what privilege actually is. And that's that's something else that my friend's had to surmount. That's something he's had to surmount is, being a black guy in a majority white country. That's one thing. Yet those people will make that everything.
Yeah.
It's like, what about these other 50 different, intersecting dimensions of alleged privilege?
Yeah.
Basically, it's fuck you, fuck off. Like, come walk a mile in my shoes, age 8. Like it's boring. It's boring, and that's fundamentally it. It's like, it's the middle class bloody, the ones who go home to the nice houses and drink the nice red wine every night, and those people. It's those that are they're the ones that will oh, you can't say that. Have you seen those videos where there's a guy dressed in like mariachi outfits and things like Mexican dress, and he goes up to white people and he said, what do you think? Oh, cultural appropriation, you're awful, you're terrible, disgusting. Goes up to Mexicans and they go, oh my god, you look amazing, look at you, thank you, and he's like, are you bothered? And they're like, not in any way. And it's that, to me, is what it is to be a straight white man in this country. Is stop bloody targeting all of it, tarring us as if we're all the exact same thing, because you wouldn't do that to black people, you wouldn't do that to Asian people. It's almost like we're this glom of all the data. My conversation with George, and all data you'll have seen, poor white boys particularly are behind at every degree, at every stage educationally. Like women are out earning men up to essentially the point at which primary care becomes primary care of children and parents becomes the thing that overtakes their ability to go out and have that career. So it's like it's that Rodney King moment. Can't we all just get along? It's that let's stop just because male and white, and again we will edit around this to make some semblance of sense. It's like, just back off a minute. Life's bloody hard for all of us. But
Rich, it's so critical what you're saying, because your original question for me was like, what would you say to people's assumptions? And I'm speaking, I suppose, to my own assumptions, and I think that when I read about that theory and I started to go, fuck, that's, I see that in myself, being exposed to George's work and paying attention to the things that he's posting, and thinking about them, reflecting on them, and then also Rich, just through conversations of like, I've been so enriched by being able to have so many emotionally deep and emotionally nutriently dense conversations with men now, and heard all kinds of things that completely then changes my expectation of when I meet a man, like meeting you for the first time today, I'm anticipating a fullness and a wholeness, and I don't think that we are, the way that men are talked about and the way that we're kind of socialized to think about men, I don't think men are allowed to inhabit that wholeness in the way that what you've just been speaking about, all these assumptions about what it means to be a straight white man, and how fucking, with this, with the sort of life that you've lived, coming through things that the majority of people are blessed to never have to imagine what the taste of that might be like. Because in some ways, I think the biggest privilege in a way is the people that can walk into a room and feel safe, psychologically safe and regulated, and you really can't see
safe.
that, and physically safe. I remember there's I won't say his name because it's a private story and I don't know if he wants it to be shared, but I remember this wonderful guy I know who's, I don't know how old he is, probably about my age, a bit older, who was saying it's only in the last few years that he's been able to sit with his back to a door because he grew up with so much kind of violence. And and what I mean by that, the two-dimensional versus the wholeness, is that I would have looked at that guy previously and never thought for a second that would be something that he might be going on for him. And now, it's completely different for me. And I guess the point, I make that point, Rich, because I want people listening to understand that's not in some ways I do it it helps me with my work. So it's really, really important that I've done that. But as a human being, it's helped my life so much because it's brought me energetically into richer connection, deeper emotional bonds with the men that I meet, the men that I know, and that has been so enriching for me as a human being. And that's our evolutionary context.
We only evolve through connection.
Exactly.
That no man is an island. I've heard you talk, and I've actually talked at great length about how do you punish a man. How do you punish a human being? Isolate them. Socially, culturally, insert way here, in prison. How do I punish you hardest, worst? Just get you in a room by yourself. That's the...
And Rich, it's not just, I think that's such a critical point, and it's not just physical isolation, but the emotional isolation that comes. And then to go to your point, if you're being told as a straight white male that you are more privileged and you've had a life of complex pain, then we as a society are just emotionally isolating.
What does that do to somebody? And I'd like to think, and again, I'm just a sack of meat, but I'd like to think that I'd think intelligently about that and say, well, they can't know, and this is the experience that they bring to it. But my drive throughout my life has been anger. I'm going to prove you. And nobody cares. And it's funny, as the older I get, the more. But it's still my driver is anger. It's fuck you, and the horse you rode in on. I'll win. If I can't physically win, then I'll intellectually win. If I can't, and that's and it's those things. And it's but that's no good for society either. Yeah. Where because you're told, you're endlessly peppered, especially in post Me Too, as you rightly touched on. And I get that. Was that necessary? Was it not? Is it a moment of culture that needed to happen? Put that to one side for people far smarter than me. But the idea that you're peppered constantly with you're this, you're that, as a white person X, as a straight person Y, as a male Z, you're like, well, I'm just going to be angry. What's my response? It's going to be it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
And then they say, see, I knew that. Yes, I knew that's the person you were all along. It's like, but you can't endlessly tell me that I'm a shit human being just by dint of my very existence, and then expect me to be supportive of or understanding of your point of view. And again, I try to be, and I think I am, and I think I do a good job of it, and I think lots of men watching, listening to this will. But also, there's only so much you can take before you go, like, okay, fine, let's say that I am all the things you tell me that I am. You're seeing a bit of a counteracting and almost not aggressive, but you're seeing an opposition to these narratives now. And then they're saying, fine, I'll opt out of the dating pool. Right. Fine, not always in the incel-y type way that we talk about, but in a, I know my value. Fine, I'll leave. And you see this thing. It's all the most dangerous jobs in the world, obviously, are typically done by men. What if we don't do those? Fine. Let's watch how society just burns, shall we? If I'm all these things that you tell me, and I withdraw myself from society. Let's be more positive. Sorry, that feels really negative. And actually, we're going to have a conversation about suicide in men. Let's be super positive. Yeah. But when you sit with a suicidal man and you've sat with 32 of them, you've done these polls of so many. What is that experience actually like for you? Like human to human. I mean, you've touched on it a tiny bit, but what surprises you as they start to open up? Do they want to open up?
Yeah, my experience has been completely that, and I mean, Rich, I just met so many beautiful men, like just so many people that have had really, really difficult, complicated lives, and when they start to tell you about some of the things that have happened to them, you think, well, I'm not surprised that you've had moments where you've thought, I don't know how to endure all of this. Because each of us can only take so much pain. We all have a threshold where I don't care who you are, everybody has a threshold where the pain will become absolutely, in moments, exquisitely unbearable. And if you've been exposed to high pain and afforded really poor tools to regulate that pain, and the tools that you're using are potentially actually just compounding your pain, making it worse, then can be on a really dangerous pathway with it all. So I'm sort of just continually moved by. I think the biggest thing that's changed for me, Rich, is it's so normal for me now for people to feel suicidal. I felt that way at times in my life. The last time I felt that way, the first time I remember feeling that way was when I was around 18, 19. And the last time I felt that way was last August, so just 4 or 5 months ago. So for me, it's not something that... For me, it's a sort of feeling that you have to walk this kind of tightrope with, of on one side balancing, for me, the normality of it. It's completely normal, I think, with the complex, difficult, challenging life. It's so fucking weird and difficult being a human being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I always say, and again, post my brother's suicide, I say it's a choice. And it's I mean, whether I believe these words or not, right? We all have the choice. It's the most inalienable right we have is to prolong or take our own lives,
to be or not to be,
right? It's that, and you can't take that away from somebody. It's the one thing that's the most, like, it's profoundly human to have that as a notion. And we have millions of thoughts every day. We're not our thoughts. We are perhaps clusters of thoughts, patterns of thoughts. But I'm a big one for actions are. There was a whole conversation post Me Too as well around intent and So whether you intend some harm or not, if harm befalls somebody as a result of something you've done, said, whatever, then it doesn't matter what your intention was. I disagree. I'm a big one for intent is enormous. If my intent wasn't to harm that human being with my words and harm's happened, then accountability is a different matter.
Yeah.
But I think we've lost the ability to forgive. I think that we're so quick and easy, and we're so polarized, and we're so desperate to say, "You're the problem, I'm not." Or whatever it is, because like social media has not helped this in any way. I spoke to Zach Rauch. He was the lead researcher for the Anxious Generation book by Jonathan Haidt, which has been obviously quite famous for really drawing that parallel between, not proving, but showing that causation of ill mental health as a direct result of social media and smartphones is indeed causation. It's not just correlation anymore. We can point to, social media and smartphones, particularly among teens, makes mental health worse.
Right.
So we've got data out there. We can put our fingers on these things. But I wanted to get into, you've touched on in other interviews the wisdom of suicidal men, and I guess it follows on maybe from what we're talking about here and those beautiful conversations that you have. What do you mean by the wisdom of suicidal men?
What I mean, I suppose, just to go back to your point as well about because the choicing, I find I totally hear what you're saying. I think the earlier when I mentioned kind of walking that tightrope of accepting suicidal thoughts and feelings as being one aspect of the kind of buffet of human emotions that one might feel. It's one plate on that table, and it's a normal. It can be a very normal plate. And on the other hand, having to take those thoughts and feelings really, really seriously, because certainly in my experience, when they descend upon you, it can be so rapid, and you lose sight so quickly of the things that anchor you to life. And so for me, it's kind of this balancing act of trying to normalize thoughts and feelings of suicide. It doesn't mean that somebody is mentally unwell or is experiencing some kind of mental illness. For me, I see it as somebody who's in intense pain in that moment and doesn't know how to regulate that pain. And in that feeling of hopelessness and inescapability, perceived inescapability, suicide starts to feel like the only release. But yeah, I would say one of the ways I suppose that doing this work kind of changed my life so much, Rich, is that you're brought into, you're reminded all of the time of the things that matter, because there's this great suicide researcher, one of the old sort of grandfathers of suicide research, Edwin Schneidman, and his theory of suicide in a way is that the author of suicide is pain, and that pain comes in response to unmet needs. So this person is in suicidal crisis, is in heightened pain because they have certain fundamental needs that aren't being met. And so the next sort of question is, well, what are our needs? And how do you define what is a need versus a want or a desire or a wish? And we don't really know, because we haven't got a manual, unfortunately, that kind of explains to us human behaviour. But the way kind of psychologists understand what a need is what are the consequences for you as a human being if you don't have that thing? So if I said to you, Rich, you're never having water again in your life, there's going to be really bad consequences for you quite quickly. Yeah.
Whatever it is. Yeah.
So you need water. If you said to me, Susie, you're never having this herbal tea again, you could come and see me in 12 years' time and I'd still be doing fine. So I don't really need the herbal tea. We need the water. In the same way, if you said to me, Susie, you'll never have a moment of tenderness again with somebody. Nobody's going to tell you that they love you. No one's going to give you a hug. You're never going to see the green grass again. Or I would start to feel, I would unravel. Going back to your earlier point of what's the worst thing we could do to somebody is isolate them. So we start to understand that what these needs might be because of the consequences to a human being if they don't have them. And then if we think about people in heightened suicidal pain, these are people that are the needs that they're not having met are so painful to endure. They think, I don't know that I can stay in existence and endure the unmetness of these needs, if that makes sense. So for me, when I have conversations with men who are suicidal, is they're always reminding me of what some of those fundamental needs are. And it's not, I don't have conversations with men where they say, I wish I had a bigger house, or going back to our earlier conversations about the sort of trappings of a capitalist life, none of them are yearning for, there may be an aspect of yearning for financial stability, of like struggling, but it's nothing about material kind of, more and more kind of material wealth. The things that they're yearning for is this feeling of emotional kind of poverty, relational poverty, of feeling like deep isolation, deep loneliness, and feelings of failure, not being able to sort of tolerate a sense of themselves, and not being able to cope with this emotional storm that's kind of happening inside. Now, the roots of those unmet needs, Rich, are so many different things. So when it comes to male suicide, I think of the core to pain in a suicidal crisis is that those three notes are these unmet needs. But the reason why those needs are not met is different for every single person. So if I'm a dad who is going through a divorce and doesn't have access to my children, then the pain of my unmet needs is caused by a very specific set of circumstances. Whereas, if I'm a man that has went through life having a very complicated childhood, has an undiagnosed neurodivergency that means I've always struggled at work, I've not been able to get employment, I'm in temporary housing, then my unmet needs are from a very different reason, but it's still those fundamental needs that aren't being met, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So the conversations that I have with men is reminding me all of the time of the things that make life valuable, the things that make life meaningful. So for me, I don't want to say this in a in a flippant way, but I remember as a kid being told about in the mines when the miners would send down canaries, and when the canaries stopped singing and died, that was a sign for the miners that the air down here isn't safe anymore. Now we can look at people who are suicidal. The non-suicidal people can look at us that are and go, well, they can put you in a box of unwellness, of saying that you were different to us, you have some kind of like mental health illness, and that's on you. Or my perspective is that we can look at people and say that this is a spectrum of human experience in the modern world, and in some ways the people who are suicidal are the canaries. They're further down the tunnel of the modern world, of the societies that we've created, and they are telling you the air down here is not fit for us to be breathing, and that includes the air of the non-suicidal people as well. And for me, I think that I get kind of, there's so much about the modern world that I think is not conducive to us meeting our needs. And I think it's even more layered on for men. And then when we start to think about privilege, if we accept that humans have a fundamental need for belonging, and in that belonging, it's not just people that you have a laugh with, it's people that you are meaningfully, intimately connected with, where there's this reciprocal bond of love and you feel, I am safe with this person, and when the shit hits the fan, I can go to this person and they will help me. And if we ask each other now, who do we think between you and I has had more access to that by virtue of our gender through our lives? I would say I have. By virtue of being born a woman, the way that I've been socialised, the things that society, communities, schools, families have taught me, I've had more access to those things.
You talked earlier on when we first met, not long after, about your mum particularly being able to show you what I guess being a woman was, and what it means to be a good woman, what it means to be. I think for myself and for many others potentially, it took me a long time to meet my first good man.
Yeah, it
took me a very long time, decades. Until I could truly take a step back and say, do you know what, I think that was the first, the first good man that I can truly look at and go, objectively, you're a good human being. You're somebody that maybe I should model myself after. Lots of people who, in smaller ways, maybe I'd looked at and thought, okay, there's bits of you, but that role model notion of, what is a good man, what isn't a good man. We see fatherlessness at higher levels in, obviously we could talk about race, we could talk about socioeconomic class, we could talk about these things, we could talk about imprisonment, all of that. It is something that is strikingly absent from people. In fact, I'll go the opposite. The converse is, we know that boys that grow up to be men, that are surrounded by good men, typically thrive and have generally happier, more fulfilled lives. We know it's not even it's not even up for debate that when you've got a dad in the house, when you've got good men around you, they can show you the way in a way. It's again, tribes have shown us this through millennia. We can see this. Like for me, I think back and I think, right, there was that rugby coach. Okay, that that gave me, that person gave me the tiniest bit of self-esteem that I didn't realise I needed. Okay, and that you can build on that. And okay, that person, I gave myself to them. I apprenticed myself to them, and then they taught me that. So. But you don't always have the opportunity to meet those people. So there are lots of men out there that are just desperate for that connection, and I was fortunate to find it through sport. And then, my chosen career, found good men in those places. Not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. Yeah. You said that...
And Rich, I don't want to I think it's so important what you've just said. And the emotional void of not having those things and having to teach yourself them when you're not old enough to, really... we're not to say, kids are fucking unbelievable. Like, they are phenomenal what they can But yeah, I think what you've said is so deep and it's so profound, and the ways in which that can affect a life. And none of us really have any idea each time that we meet a man, come into contact with a man, the man that is carrying that void and the men that aren't. Some ways there are behaviours that may indicate certain things, but like, this is what I mean about that. Like, it's a privilege to have been raised by good people.
Do you know the privileges I see them are? Have you been modelled a good relationship? Yes, no. Have you been modelled good friendships? Yes, no. Do your parents, model good friendships? Have you been modelled good parenting, good financial security, good, insert things here that 9 times out, lots of people don't even consider those things to be privileges. I think if I think about the men around me as I grew up, and same obviously for my siblings, there were drug dealers,
Right.
drug addicts, kind of, and rarely, and not good people, fundamentally not, and then again, they would have had their own complex set of, circumstances that led to choices they made. And I was quite cognizant of that quite early, quite like, okay, well, you've, I could see the struggle that these people have been through, particularly my uncle. I've talked about him on here before. I don't mind keeping this bit in. Who did take his own life when he was 29, heroin addict. I'd seen he'd come stay at the house. He'd jump out of the windows to go and score. Even though he'd been locked in a room, which was my dad at the time's way of trying to help him. He was his kid brother. They'd gone through things as children that just contribute to that generational cycle of abuse and upset and kind of just like unhappiness, and I think that's the sadness is when you grow up like this, there's not, you don't even know what happiness looks like. Happiness to me was playing a video game, or and that's and then or reading a good book, or drawing, or whatever it was to effectively hide. But it's how do you find good men when there just aren't any around you, and all of a sudden then your mum becomes your role model of what a good man should be,
right?
Because you get these women that effectively have to play both roles, and struggle in doing so because of course they don't know either. So when I think about my youngest brother, and I'm trying to model to him what being a good man is, I don't know myself. I'm 9.5 years older than him, so I think of the virtues that I hold dear, which is honesty and strength. I mean, I used to say to him, just be strong. Like whatever's happened, just like let's be strong. I mean, we got a tattoo, Kia Kaha, which in Maori means be strong or stay strong, and that was something that. So we shared that. And
what does stay strong mean to you? Like, what does
basically? So I used to have a thing, and I don't have this anymore. Where ABC, it was A is where you were, B is the shit thing, C is where you're going to eventually end up anyway. So let's take my uncle's suicide. And I remember this. A, he was alive. B, he's not. C, I've got to get past it. It's almost like skipping B to get to C, knowing that you don't like. It's like, well, I'm going to feel the same. The reality is it's going to happen anyway. So staying strong to me when I was a kid looked very different to what it looks like now. It looks like me jumping B to get to C, knowing that I'm going to be at C eventually anyway. Right. And what that does is just. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to then unpack that and go, so you're not working through a single thing. No, you just jump to it. But that's when you grew up in a certain way.
So that was
that was very, very much my mantra. But every next day is another day. And when you grow up in and around violence particularly, and things get brushed under the carpet, tomorrow's another day. And hey, don't worry about it. So things are so quickly just forgotten, because you've still got to live that life. You've still got to be with those people. You've still got to be around that situation, those situations. So that to me was being strong as a kid. Then this isn't a macho not crying thing. This was a survival. It was let's get past it because I'm in control to a degree of how I react to what happens right now. If insert something violent happens in the house around me, at me, whatever, to somebody I love, then okay, well, are they safe now? Yeah, cool. Let's get to C as quickly as I can. A was where we were. B is the bad thing. C is where I want to be. Stay strong to Jordan, to my brother, was, be strong, stay strong, was basically don't let it break you. Don't let that thing, don't let that experience that, you're far stronger than you ever realised, and he is, and he was, and that's the sad reality is that, he was far more Like, I mean, maybe he just used all of his strength up. That's the sad reality, isn't it? Is and he exercised a choice that he'd always had. But I just maybe that's it. Maybe he's as strong as he could be for as long as he could be. But it's not a kind of endlessly flagellate or self-flagellate and get yourself through and just endure pain until eternity, because that sounds a lot like hell to me. I'm not a religious man, but that sounds an awful lot like being stuck with a hot poker just until you're going to say stop at some point, right? So it was that was a big mantra. Again,
and that's why I wanted to pause on it.
Yeah, some of this gets edited, lots of this gets edited out.
But I think it's important as well for people listening, because I think sometimes people hear something like "stay strong" and they think it's a kind of like a different version of saying "man up" in a way, which you're not saying at all. What you're saying is these were the survival strategies in an environment of deep unsafety, of like, I can't sit and process what happened yesterday because I'm in today and something might be happening.
You're advised not to, and you're told not to, and again, it was very much it doesn't make sense to dwell, because what use does it? And again, to go to the emotional aspect of it, it's, and I think very differently now, but it's what use is it to sit there? Where's progress if we sit and just really sit with our own upset endlessly? Nothing changes. We're exactly where we were tomorrow, the next day, the next week, the next month. Whereas for me, taking some personal authorship, as I said, that self-authorship was massive, and that's what being strong is to me, or was certainly to me, possibly even still is like, well, life's gonna deal us mostly a dick hand. What are you gonna do with it? How do you play your best out of what you've been given? But I'm very aware, sorry, of giving too much, and I hope you've got time.
No, Rich, we're fine. Just take your time. There's no rush at all. We can. Because
don't
panic.
Of the 32 men that you spoke to, really direct question, but do you know if any have taken their lives?
I don't know, and that's one of the emotionally challenging parts of the job. Is that all the time? There's and then you'll read back. I've just was looking at a paper that's hopefully about to be published, and I was looking back, reading, because I had to do a few edits to it, and reading some of the quotes again from the participants, and just thinking, I've no idea if these people are still here. And that's, that can be... So I sometimes speak about this, Rich, like, it is hard for me sometimes to stay calm in certain environments, talking to certain people, because I want things to change, and we don't have time, and we're already so far behind from where we should be, and it's fucking disgraceful. It's really, really disgraceful. And in the time that's not being taken to do stuff, I come into contact a lot with families now living with a legacy that is brutal, which I say very respectfully to you, because I know that you are now living it, but it is, for me, like, you've got a really beautiful way of putting it about self-authorship, and you now have to make sense of a pain, or the consequences of a pain that you've now inherited that pain in a way, and you've got to find a way to cope with it and deal with it. But the fundamental thing of wanting something to be different is not in your control anymore. And I
think that's been the hardest aspect of it, is, again, for somebody for whom
it's so important.
Control was everything. It's like, how do I get up and out? That's my sense. Up and out of the situation you're in. Powerful. Think about it all the time. Certainly did as a young person. And then I don't have control here.
Yeah.
I thought I did. I thought I could support. We touched on James's Place as we were walking earlier, being a support for suicidal men, instant access to free support. In was it Manchester, London?
It's Liverpool, Newcastle, London. They've got one just opening in Birmingham.
Yes, they have. Sorry,
Yeah.
apologies, not Manchester. My apologies. So Liverpool, London, Newcastle, and
Birmingham.
soon to be Birmingham.
Yeah.
So I concern myself with the idea that I was only ever a hotel stay and a Google search away from supporting Jordan further and getting him that help that you always think it's the next person that you meet that might support and stop that inevitability, and it did feel inevitable. That inevitability from happening, and it's like let's stop this. It doesn't have to be inevitable. Was like let's keep strong, let's stay strong, let's keep moving. There's a way out of this, and then you realise just how lacking in control you are. And I don't mind speaking to it whatsoever. My last year has been one of just losing faith in control to a degree, and drinking 6-7 times a week for the first 3 months. Easily,
Right.
until I pass out drinking, because I don't want to be anywhere near in my own head. Nightmares are awful. I tried sleeping tablets and they just, nightmares crack through dreams and into waking life. And it's just, you see him everywhere. I see him in ways that he wouldn't want to be seen. I'm having conversations with him that aren't real. It's that, texting him constantly and, all the things that, I'm sure, grief makes us do these things. And then, to a lesser degree, the 6 months preceding that, 4 times a week drinking, like that, you're making choices that aren't good for you. Again, I've always worked, I'm trained as a personal trainer and worked in PR. I know fitness, I know my body, I know what's healthy. Do you know what's not healthy? Drinking 7 times a week, drinking 4 times a week. That's not good for you. It's not good for you emotionally, spiritually, physically. It's not good for the people around you. But as the people left behind, you feel like guilty for any positivity, guilty for any want to move forward. I've always been a driven, ambitious person.
Yeah, I can feel it.
Really, and then you just lose that, and because any feeling or of want or ambition or desire feels like a guilty one, because he can't feel that. He can never feel that again. He can never feel joy, happiness. I said it in a solo episode I did to celebrate 50 episodes. I went to the circus with my family, and I just at the end just burst into tears because I'd found myself guiltily feeling happy in a moment that didn't feel like appropriate to be. I mean, of course it's appropriate contextually, but it didn't feel appropriate from a time perspective. And what is it? How long are you supposed to feel to self-harm effectively? And that's what I was doing. How long do you do that? And that, so yeah, you feel like you've lost all that control. And I don't know if this resonates in any way with the men that you've spoken to, because I was never suicidal, I don't think, as an adult. As a child sometime, there's one particular time, but I was never, I just didn't want to wake up, because to wake up is to relive it, and I think lots of people that are left behind will feel that, Christ, I've just woken up again, and it's real. It's not that it's some horrible dream. It's that person isn't here. That space that they used to take up is no longer. They deserve to take that space up. They don't anymore. I can feel it. I can literally. He's about my size. Maybe a bit smaller, but like, I know what he feels like. And that's the difficulty of it is. My order of questions has gone completely way off. I guess I knew that this conversation would be, a slippery one. I'm intrigued by the men that you've spoken to particularly, because I think they're the ones that hold a key to understanding, more than possibly I can. I spoke to my brother endlessly, and again, it wasn't a here 1 week, gone the next thing. This was a protracted thing that happened, to him. And again, I've mentioned the ACEs and the adverse childhood experiences. We'll get into it, but why do you think society struggles so much when it hears men talk about pain that they're in? What is it about society? And I guess is it because we're supposed to be stronger than that? What's the mindset, do you think?
I think it's so complicated. Of so many different factors can contribute to I think there's, and the barriers can kind of go everywhere. I think there's barriers for men, for some men, and feeling able to, if you've been conditioned to present certain ways of being, that it feels inaccessible to you to then present a different way that may be more, there's so many different kind of, I think what's hard, Rich, is that when I'm asked questions like that, because men are so diverse, and so
trying to give a one shot
that
answer
would
to something.
sum it up. Whereas actually, I've spoken to some men who really do still feel that there's shame around seeking help, that there's shame around that they would see it as a weakness. I've spoken to so many other men absolutely desperate for help, who've been to get help. The help hasn't been effective. So there's such kind of like, variety of things going on. And also I think that there's, for some men, a real inability to conceive of themselves as a recipient of care. It's their job to take care of others, and they don't almost have an understanding of themselves of, why would I be the one to receive care? Or, some men who've said, I know that there's, maybe a 2-year waiting list for a service. And if I take a space in that list, how do I know that the person behind me doesn't need it more than me? Yeah. And so, they don't feel comfortable then kind of taking that position up. And then I think on the looking broader outside of men, I can speak to as women, and going back to that idea, I sort of always come back to this idea of like gamma bias, and I've spoken to I've heard so many stories now of men that have experienced all kinds of things: abuse, neglect, poverty, racism, homophobia, domestic abuse in relationships, parental alienation, relationship breakdown, financial problems, body image, body dysmorphia, substance misuse, self-harm, binge eating, like so many different stories, the ways in which men have experienced harmful, difficult lives. And I, prior to doing this work, never had access so much to those narratives. And of course, then it changes how you look at people. I've said before, and I think I may have read this in somebody's work, but it was like before I'd always been trained to look at men through a telescope and on the lens, the front of the telescope, I put the lens of the worst men that I knew, or the worst men in the world, and then looked out at men through that telescope. And actually, when I took that lens off and I put the lens of the best men I knew, the men that I wouldn't be sat in this chair without, and started to look at men through that lens, it was absolutely transformative to me. And I felt at times, Rich, great shame that I'd been doing that, because I understand now this deep reservoir of pain that so many men are carrying that feels invisible, because it is to some degree socially invisible. And going back to being a person that's always been concerned about the people that are alone with their pain, I suddenly found a group of people that were feeling deeply kind of isolated with it. So what I'm saying is that I think it comes still from all sides. I think that there are still, for some men, a real resistance around sharing things, which I also completely understand, Rich, because a lot of times as well, there's been a very difficult, complicated exposure to some kind of environment where it was a good strategy for you to not show what you were feeling. Not just, if you then think about culturally what you're being told, that then gets kind of entwined with what's happening to you on an environment level as well, then it can be, but I know, this is, I think what is so powerful about having like other men speaking out about their pain and normalizing that, but also within that, Rich, finding a place for like dignity within it, of self-authorship around it doesn't define me. I can, that things can be I think so for example, I know from one of my brothers, for example, how powerful it was when Tyson Fury spoke out about his panic attacks and said that there's no opponent he's ever faced in the ring that was more frightening than having a panic attack. And I think that was so powerful for my brother to hear, because I think that for a lot of men as well, or certainly something that comes up a lot in my conversations with men, is that there is, and I don't think as women we experience this to the same extent, that for certain men there's very clear ideas about what makes a successful man and what doesn't. And having panic attacks definitely doesn't sit necessarily in what certain men feel defines a successful man. So there's then this feeling of, not only is that a fucking horrific condition to live with, but then the shame, the additional factors through these kind of like cultural ideas that we all share about men and masculinity can then sort of compound what's already kind of a difficult situation.
I guess it then gets to when men's pain is really only taken seriously when it's, once it becomes dramatic or tragic.
Yeah. Because, sorry, Rich, go back to your earlier point when you were talking about your grief and that you were the drinking 7 days too. And this is something that comes up in my research a lot, of the way that men are, if you're being told, keep your pain to yourself, suppress your emotions, be strong, be independent, be self-reliant, cope by yourself.
Do you know when the majority of the drinking was? When my partner had gone to bed. And then you fucking cane it by yourself. It's isolated. It's shameful. It's it's embarrassing. It's it's as I said. It felt like and I recognised it at the time as a form of self harm. It's you don't want to think, and therefore it's the easiest method to
to turn that off.
To turn that off, It was quick and easy, and it's not like I was waking up and drinking. I didn't drink during the day or anything like that. So and even and it's basically been the last month where I've just been very much in control of it. I feel like I've had no issues with not drinking. It was a choice to do it, and it feels like a choice not to. Not everybody's lucky enough to have that. Yeah. Again, that's a privilege, right? That physiologically or psychologically or something, I'm. It's not afflicted me as a disease that I know many people find it to be. I'm very bloody lucky with that, because Christ, like the amounts I was drinking, you'd assume that it would. You'd assume that it would manifest itself in, some form of issue. Stop when you just stop that. It hasn't. I'm very lucky, but for me, it was just again, the ABC thing, I stopped doing that maybe 10 years or so ago, so that I could feel what B felt like, because it was important to me to do so. That happened around a divorce, and it was important for me to then go, okay, well, actually, no, you are a human being. You should probably feel these things, because not doing so, you're not a robot, but it was a conscious thing to do that. It was a way to cope. I mean, just to jump ahead briefly,
I just pause you before you jump ahead, because again, I think that you've said something that's so huge, and I don't want it to kind of get lost or forgotten. But I think as well as women, we don't sit with what is just when what you've just said about you had to learn how to feel, how to be in a feeling, to be able to say to yourself, I am not a robot. And I don't think that we necessarily understand as women, because it's kind of like this, it's like this common joke that society has about, like, somehow, this idea we perpetuate about, men not being very good at emotions or something. But the fucking brutality of not being able to have permission to feel, but you're still constantly feeling, because we're feeling creatures. We may think that we have a degree of control and things that we can, that we suppress it, we disassociate from it, but the feeling is somewhere, somehow still happening within us. And to be denied the ability to be in connection with that, because a feeling is data as well to tell you.
Felt self-imposed. And I don't know how true that is. People might disagree with me and say that, nope, society did that. But certainly when I was a teenager, it felt self-imposed, dissociative, and necessary.
I mean, this is because this stuff is so complicated, Rich. And in your context of what you grew up in, I can see that suppression served you. So that we also, when we talk about emotional suppression and things like that, there are times and places where absolutely it's probably you've got a choice between a shit solution and a fucking shit solution. And sometimes doing the shit thing is a thing that actually, in that environment, I absolutely get it. And I suppose that it seems as you sort of come out of that and then into your adult life, this process of starting to acknowledge that your coping strategy was to move from A to C, and that you'd not been to the land of B in a way. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is, in some ways, because also there's this entwining all of the time, going back to what's happening in the environment and then what's happening kind of culturally as well. And I think a lot of the times, Rich, it happens subconsciously. We don't even necessarily know.
Wanted to touch on adverse childhood experiences. I've written a few things. If anybody doesn't know what they are, it's essentially, as it says, right? It's things that happen as a child that adversely impact you, and it's one of 10 things, and it's things like as we touched on, what are your parents still together? Family members in prison, violence against you, violence around you, these sorts of things. We score quite highly. I won't say where, as siblings. I've got estimates are I'm around 15 times more likely than somebody that scores 0 to have an issue with alcohol or drugs. To put that into perspective, the lifetime risk of alcohol use disorder, AUD, for the general population is about 1 in 10 people. A large-scale study, I think it's 30,000 people, you've probably seen the same study, approximates my risk at 1 in 1.5 people over a lifetime. So I'm more likely than not to have, at some stage in my lifetime, an issue with alcohol or drugs. I hate that I've become that statistic, but let's sit with it for a sec. So yeah, more likely than not, 1 in 1.5. It's not inevitable. A minority obviously wouldn't struggle at all. We'll get through it. We'll get through life without any of that. But as I said to you earlier on, I guess we all become statistics eventually. Lifetime suicide attempt risk in the general population is 1 in 50, so 2%. We sit in a bracket of being about 20 to 30 times more likely to take our own lives. In other words, 1 in 3 to 50% of people that score as we do will attempt suicide. Again, it's not a definite, not an inevitability. And the likelihood of going to prison isn't dissimilar. Lifetime incarceration risk is 1 in 50 for general population, so 2%. So 2%, same as the lifetime risk of suicide, 2%. Roughly 1 in 5 to a third of people that score as we do will experience incarceration at some point. Now, each of those things has been borne out among just us 5 siblings. Right. Every one of those things, right. Multiple times for some of those aspects. So again, I'm very, very conscious of protecting family and thoughts and all those things. But just to speak to, and it's like, to me, that doesn't abdicate me from any responsibility whatsoever. It doesn't take away the choices I've made or haven't made. It doesn't take away Jordan's choice. It just means that I wish that sometimes people could go, okay, well, again, and it comes back to the privilege thing. It's like, you have no idea what that person's carrying with them, and the extent to which statistically that will then burden them. And again, you go into prisons where prison's a good barometer, I guess, of most likely adverse childhood experiences, right? I bet there's not one single person in prison that hasn't, not I bet, it's incredibly unlikely that there are people that are incarcerated that don't tick numerous adverse childhood experience boxes. Just like, I'd imagine the question to you is, have you spoken to any suicidal men that ticks 0?
Certainly it's a recurring theme in a lot of men's stories, and it's not always necessary stuff that's happening in the caregiving home. It can also be things that are happening at school and or in different environments. The interesting thing about the ACEs as well is in the original form, one of the 10 questions is around, did your mother ever experience violence? So going back to that gendered view, the question isn't gendered. The gamma bias idea. That question isn't asking, did a caregiver at home experience violence? It's very much making the assumption that men would be the harm doers and women the victims.
Which, to George's point, is 40% of domestic violence
Right.
happens to men. That people don't like to hear that, but that's statistically true.
And so even then you're being reinforced by institutions and by the things that happen to us in childhood inform the templates that we kind of then hold about ourselves. And again, this isn't always conscious. A lot of the times these templates about how do we feel about ourselves, what do we do with our emotions, how do we feel them, what can we feel, how do we express them, are other people safe, can they be relied upon, are there people there to take care of me, to protect me? Those are the templates then that take us through our lives. So then as an adult, when I start a new job, consciously or not, we can be referring to those templates in terms of like how this situation is going to be for us. And if you're in an environment where your templates serve you in that environment, so for example, what you've been saying about going from A to C, that you had, that each day was a new day and may have its new challenges and difficulties, and therefore there's no fucking time to worry about what happened yesterday. You just got to keep going. That's probably the best strategy, one of the best strategies you had in that environment. But when you leave that environment, and let's say you're in in an adult relationship now with somebody who isn't like the people that you grew up with, but you're still using that template, it then creates these new sort of challenges and difficulties that can make it really complicated for somebody to meet those needs that we've talked about of like belonging, connection, the need that we have to be able to tolerate ourselves. And this is a really big thing, I think, being able to tolerate the idea of, I have to learn how to tolerate the idea of Susie. And
I don't even think I'm still there.
Yeah. Which, you know what I mean? A lot of days I'm not either. I share that with you.
And I hope, I imagine that a lot of people watch and listen will feel exactly that. And, maybe that's the shared human condition, is that we're each just trying to get used to ourselves. It's funny, I speak to my partner who had a very lovely upbringing. I mean, she experienced loss, great loss as a teenager, one of her brothers. I think that's okay to say. But otherwise, lovely. She can't fathom how somebody could not love themselves.
Oh, wow.
Can't fathom it.
Wow.
Cannot. She's like, I know I'm a good person. What? You do? And like, that idea of, outwardly being very confident. And I am, and I'm sociable, and I'm, quite extroverted, and, I don't think there's anything that I can't do. Last year, notwithstanding. But that's quite, is that learned, or is that ballsy, I'll show you mentality, who knows? But yeah, she just can't get to low self-esteem. She can't get to, or she can get to it. That's unfair. That's mischaracterizing. Yeah. But like, she's like, I know I'm a great person. What the hell? You don't love yourself? What?
Yeah. She can't taste it for herself and imagine
which is wonderful. I remember the first time I went and met her family. I felt so strange. I was like, because what will happen, and you'll have heard this before, is when somebody raises up their voice, to me that's precursive. That's right. Violence was about to happen. Threat level goes up. It's that there are certain sounds that you get used to, and again, I don't want to go through them for the sake of my family, but there are certain things that get said or sounds that you hear. It could be the tires on the drive. It could be whatever it is, and threat level goes up. For me, it was they talk to each other in quite a direct way.
Right.
And there's so much love in the house, so much. Yeah. They could talk to each other quite directly, and I was like, fucking hell. And I was like, okay. And I remember saying that, and she's like, and I was like, you lot are bloody quite direct with each other. And she's like, no, I'm not. I was like, you have no idea, because them's fighting words, and it felt like it. It's so funny to then, you just touched on it again, with a relationship. This isn't my wife, this is my partner now, been together 6-7 years, child together. But it's just such a funny, contradictory kind of experience of life. Like I'm like, okay, well you, and it's almost wonderful. You want people to have that.
Yeah.
Like if we could all, how what a wonderful world it'd be where everybody could walk around and know they were loved, are worth loving. Because I think lots of us don't get that, and lots of us are still wrangling that idea of who we are, and and sometimes I think that it's quite conceited and self-involved of me to still be in this. Am I? Who the hell am I, and why do I matter? Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense at all?
Absolutely.
Because I guess, when you're lacking in self-esteem, and so far you've really been the only one to try and build any of that yourself, without a framework, it's then you get to, well, I don't know why, why should I matter? Especially in the last year where I'm like, again, if I don't wake up, that's all right. Like, why pretend like I matter enough to have woken up anyway? Is kind of how it's been. Christ, I'm not number 33, am I? I promise you I'm not suicidal.
It's so moving what you're saying, and I think that there's so many things in it that we could unpack for the next hour. That I think it's going back to the ideas that we've kind of spoken about, privilege and things like that. What a privilege to move through the world with a robust self-esteem.
Oh, how wonderful.
And we can't necessarily, I can meet you, and then maybe through conversation and things that people say, you might start to, if we're sensitive people, we might start to pick up on signs of somebody struggling with how they feel about themselves. But a lot of the time, you don't necessarily see it. So you don't know that somebody's walked into this room and is internalizing the world and the things that are happening through a lens that is looking for the ways in which this person might think that I'm an idiot, or like for me, I don't mind sharing this. Like one of my coping strategies in life has been to call myself a cunt. I don't know how bad a language you could say, fine. But it's like, so for example, let's say we finish this podcast, you drive off home, and then I will spend a few minutes just calling myself a cunt. Right. Because that's how it's like. If I've called myself that now, I've beaten anybody else that might want to say it to me, and that was that was my coping strategy. Yeah. And now there may have been an environment where that was a really useful thing for me to do, but now as an adult, it's not necessarily. If I'm constantly saying to myself, Susie, you're a cunt, then it's not creating the most kind of healthy internal kind of psychological conditions. So, it's really...
How can you work against that?
I mean, I did the last therapist I had, we did do some really lovely work around. Do you know what? It was so interesting, Rich. It was like I remember really vividly one day... this voice in my head being like, you can't, and then this other voice was like, enough.
Really?
We don't talk like this in this house.
You're
anymore.
Andrew Lincoln in Love Actually. Enough.
I don't. Yeah. But it was that kind of. It was almost like I was reparenting myself of like, and that was a real kind of shift out of moving away from that. So it's so back to the sort of childhood thing, is that like we're developing these templates, and part of it is coping templates.
Mine for me, my calling myself a cunt.
Equivalent.
What the equivalent was like. It's funny because a friend of mine picked up on it, and I talked about it in a recent episode actually, where I was at a rugby match, Twickenham, watching, and a friend said, "Oh, Rich used to be big and hard and scary," and it's like necessarily. I used to like. There's not enough. I mean, I guess it's super sad at 38 to even say this, but there's not a fight I'd walk away from. Okay, do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like because and professionally, nothing bad can happen that's worse than anything that's ever happened.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You've already lived through.
So as a kid at school, it's like if you come anywhere near me, I'm hitting you for definite. Yeah. I like. There's not even a doubt in my mind. Like if you threaten me in any way, then I've seen violence, I know violence, like anything I do to you is probably going to be less than that. So like it was, but that friend didn't realise the point he'd picked at, which is like, I needed to feel like that. I needed to feel hard almost outside, because at home you're not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And also it's like nobody's going to walk all over me. Nobody's going to take the piss out of me. And you go one of two ways, I think. And I've spoken to somebody actually recently for this who he's achieved an incredible amount in his chosen discipline. I won't reveal his name just in case the bit does or doesn't make the edit. He's gone the other way. He was somewhat bullied. Right. It's similar kind of childhood, not exact, but similar. And he went the other way and was somewhat bullied. Didn't stick up for himself, and you know what people are like. They smell it. They they kind of capitalise on and make it worse for that person. And it's just funny how very similar, divergent
could go in
paths.
Different ways, yeah.
And I didn't. Do I need that in my 20s? No.
Yeah.
So I shed it quite quickly and easily, because it doesn't. It's not impressive to be able to punch somebody. It's really not. It's like you ever punched somebody, Susie?
Back in the day, I probably, definitely got into some scraps with my brothers. But no, otherwise it's just been punch bags and pads. I really enjoyed spar. Being sparred and kind of, I definitely.
The problem is when you enjoy it, and I know that I did. It's like getting hit or hitting or being hit. It's like it doesn't matter. It's quite enjoyable. And that's I've always said. You look at, and I'm not comparing myself in any way to Mike Tyson or Tyson Fury, insert person, but Tyson, look at him at his worst, most dangerous. That man, he will do anything to win.
Yeah.
He'll bite your ear off, quite literally.
Right.
And that's the mentality that I think sometimes you come out of a violent childhood with is, there was a prison show with Sean Bean. I can't remember if you ever saw it, and Stephen Graham. Phenomenal. And one of the inmates said, if it comes down to it, you got to do what you got to do. It's like poking eyes and all sorts, and it's just like, but that's the mentality you come out with is, I'm gonna, I'm not gonna be a victim. I won't allow myself to be. We digress enormously, and I apologise.
No, not at all. But
because
I think it's all really I think all of this is really, really key, and I think that you've. It illustrates as well so much this idea of the coping strategies that we develop that may serve us in one environment.
That's the point I was trying to get to.
And doesn't necessarily serve us once we're out of that environment.
So I heard you talking to George about toxic masculinity. It's not a phrase that sits brilliantly with me either. You talk. It's become such a loaded term.
Yeah.
Can you speak to your thoughts and feelings about toxic masculinity?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of hope that it's being buried. I feel to some extent that I'm hearing it less, or that people are maybe more sensitive now to the fact that this might not be the best way of phrasing it. I think my challenge with it has always been that it somehow implies that there's something inherent in you, Rich, by virtue of being a man, that has capacity for toxicness. And I don't think that is a good idea to be telling people about, that all of us have capacity for. I could do, in certain circumstances and certain conditions, then there is a violence and an anger in me. That
you hear about those women that lift cars off their children in accidents and things, right? We all have something within us.
Yeah,
I think that's we talked about the human condition earlier. It's part of our human condition to be able to go to an nth degree, to an extreme.
Yeah.
To protect yourself or loved one. So
exactly.
Can we honestly say
it's not is that a toxic thing? No, that's just actually, in a way, it's so remarkable that we put ourselves in danger to protect the people we love. So when I hear, I guess what a better way of saying it, Rich, is what comes up in my research is, and I don't, toxic's just such a disgusting word. Like, why would you? I loathe it, but I would say that I can see that there are ideas about men and masculinity that exist externally to men, that they exist in these societies and cultures and communities, and we then internalize those ideas, so they start to exist within us, but the roots of them are kind of outside of us, and that some of those ideas can be harmful for men over the long term. So it can be very harmful if you've internalized this idea that you have to be independent, you have to be self-reliant, you have to keep your pain to yourself, because it narrows the space for meaningful connection with other people. It narrows the space for you to be able to regulate and process, especially if you've had difficult things happen to your life, the emotional things that have pain that's kind of accrued in your life. So for me, these ideas about men and masculinity that are external to men that we all participate in, because something that I've tried to raise in our conversation is the fact that how I feel at times I would treat men in a very two-dimensional way, and there's something dehumanizing about that. So it's not just that it's men that that these ideas harm men, that I can also be doing harmful behaviours towards men. And so basically what I'm saying that is none of that is inherent and internal to men. So this idea that masculinity is toxic, I just think it's dangerous, it's psychologically violent, it's unhelpful, it's not true. I don't understand what it means. I don't understand what it's, I think it's, I've said this before, as somebody, as a queer person in the 90s when I was first sort of understanding my sexuality, and there was so much cultural shame about it, which I internalized and has lived with me for decades. And then it was really interesting for me doing doing this research. Sometimes I would read some of the things that men had said in a survey about the shame that they'd internalized about because of ideas that they'd heard about what it is to be a man in the world. And I thought, fuck, there's this echo in our experiences for different reasons, but we're still...
Do you think that draws you to wanting to do the research you do also? Because your sexuality is not something I've actually really thought about or heard much about.
I think that there's some I have, even though I've always said, like, obviously I'm not a man, I don't understand what the male experience is, but certainly in a romantic context, I know the feeling of like struggling to cry in front of a partner, feeling like if there's going to be a situation of danger, I'm going to be the one that steps in, that wants to protect, that wants to take care of.
One of three brothers.
Yeah, I think I've always just had,
it doesn't have to be that, because it doesn't have to be learned from them, but just maybe something in you that makes you're the protector.
Yes, I think we've had very, very different childhoods, but things that you've said about like I can be, I suppose, what am I trying to say? Yeah, that's a very familiar role for me to want to be in.
You touched on it. It's that kid that sat there with nobody to play with. It's that it's that want to make an immediate impact and difference and take care of, and kind of put it on your shoulders a tiny bit. That's interesting, because again, we are who we are for reasons that and just hearing, when was it you kind of came to terms with your own sexuality?
I think I really came to terms with my sexuality when I was drunk and I was 14. And do you remember the big lottery adverts where a hand would come out of the sky? It's you. Yeah. I remember being drunk in our local park, because that's where we go.
That's where you go
and get beers.
Yeah.
I remember being drunk, probably a little bit stoned as well. And I remember the lottery hand coming out of the sky, but it was God. And he was basically saying to me, it's going to be okay. Your sexuality is going to be okay as long as you give up smoking. And that was the deal that we made. And then I didn't give up smoking
Smoking hot girls.
20 years exactly. But yeah, it was a desperately lonely experience at that time. And I remember when I told my big brother eventually.
How old were you
19
when
I told him.
Right.
But I'd kind of figured it out at 14. And then he was really hurt that I hadn't told him earlier, which, was a really kind of beautiful reaction.
It's just pure kind of reassurance, isn't it? It's
exactly, of like
so?
acceptance. Yes,
why didn't you tell me?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And a really different time to, now that,
When would this
going
have
back
been?
20
So,
years ago,
90?
mid-90s.
Yeah, again, it's a different time. I mean, like I remember the first gay kiss on EastEnders. Do you remember that?
There was one on the first lesbian kiss was on Brookside.
Right, okay.
But on EastEnders, who was that then?
I can't remember. It was a couple of guys. I remember it being such a big deal. It was like, on the front of all the TV Choice and all the whatever magazines, and it was kind of oh god, this is coming up, and it was a big thing in the tabloids, and it was probably a few years after that, even like late 90s maybe. Yeah. And it's funny because people watching and listen to this that are that bit younger just won't be able to fathom a world in which it was
like that.
It was like that. You just didn't see it.
Yeah. But I think often rich about sport as well. Like I don't follow the women's football game, but I know that 70% of them seem to be queer.
Yes, probably about that. Yeah.
And in the and in the Premier League, Women's League, that's the case. And still in the men's league, there's in the football Premier League, certainly there's no out male player, and there's the statistically, you imagine there must be some. So you can still start to see how. There are still certain ways of being for men that I think it's still, very challenging. Anyway, what was the question? I feel like we...
On from that is interesting because I've heard you also talk about body positivity
image.
And body image, and I've heard you speak specifically in relation to women and body image, and of course, you'd be lying, blind, and/or an idiot if you were to say that culture, society, media doesn't put an enormous amount of pressure on women to look a certain way. I do think that the same can and should be said the other way around. Particularly, even as I was growing up, the body ideals that were being fed. This is post Schwarzenegger, this is post Stallone,
right.
Where every fitness magazine or every magazine's got six pack. Do you know a six pack? Or less than 1% of the population has a visible six pack, or it's like 1 to 2%. So it's like that idea that as a man you're still you're expected to be it's the notion of funny, rich, tall. But your body, you got to be in great shape. All of these things. I still think there's it's not an either or. I think. Jordan certainly, he was a chubby lad as a younger boy, and then I helped. Christ, he lost maybe 4 or 5 stone, maybe more, and ended up being the worst thing that ever happened to that boy was he realised he was very good looking,
okay.
And that became a. I guess when you've had such low self-esteem, then you can get it from being. Given that from women, it's powerful, right? And then he became a bouncer, and it's like, and then there's that power dynamic at play, where all of a sudden you're attractive by dint of authority as well as being a good-looking guy,
and literally in a protector role.
Oh my god, like you can if you're writing a Mills and Boon book, there's like the dashing bouncer that it's that right.
Especially in an environment where he didn't necessarily get to be that as a kid.
Certainly did not bullied or all those things. Again, I need to take it away from anecdotal because it's not especially helpful.
I think it's the way that this gets illuminated.
Because I've listened to obviously many of your interviews, and I love hearing the stats and the data and all those things. And this will edit down really, really brilliantly. I'll take out probably a decent amount of my nonsense.
I think it's not been nonsense, and I think it's really important.
When men talk about their childhoods, what patterns do come up most often?
I would say that there are really, really diverse experiences happening in childhood, but I think that they fundamentally impact core things. I think of it as like psychological tectonic plates. We've got these core plates. That's a great way of looking at it. Quite visual. That help us function. And again, what I've sort of described earlier, the core things that help you function is intimate connection with other people, being able to tolerate yourself, and being able to regulate your emotions in an effective way. And I think that, for example, what I see over and over in my work for very different reasons, because men have very, very different lives, but you see that things and events have happened to them where they become very isolated. So that tectonic plate is now out of sync. They've developed a very painful sense of themselves, and they haven't been able to find effective tools to regulate their emotions. So you've now got these three tectonic plates, creating these kind of earthquakes. If we start by looking at childhood, and let's take different experiences. If we think about what the boy that's being bullied, I remember speaking to this guy, lovely guy, who was horrifically bullied at school, and he told me about the experience. Like, he'd sometimes go into the school canteen and all the kids would just start chanting his name and that they hated him. So as a young kid, you've got this, if we think about this young guy's tectonic plate, so his plate of belonging, of intimate connection, well, he's being told that you're hated, you don't belong here. So that's going to put that tectonic plate in distress. His plate in terms of how he thinks and feels about himself, well, I've got everyone around me telling me that they hate me.
So I must be hateful. I must be hateable.
There must be something about me. And then we think about his emotions. Well, suddenly you're exposed to, fuck knows the kind of feelings that might come from that. And then, what kind of toolkit do you have at a young age to cope with that? So that's sort of thinking about something of bullying. But then if we take something something different that's, of emotional neglect, let's say you've got caregivers at home. I remember one guy talking about the fact that he never in his childhood experienced a hug. Nobody ever hugged him. Nobody ever told him that they loved him. So a different experience to be in a home where where there's emotional neglect versus going to school and being bullied. But you can start to imagine, okay, well, the emotional neglect, that's going to impact your connections to other people. It's going to impact how you think and feel about yourself. It's going to impact how you regulate your emotions. So for very, very different reasons, I think that childhood experiences can start to affect those tectonic plates. And if they become your core template, so what we've been talking about earlier about then I'm now an adult, but I'm going into my relationships still feeling like the kid that's going to walk into a school hall and be told that I'm hated. And the thing that I think is so distressing is that, going back to the point that I said earlier, I really believe that all of us can only tolerate so much pain. And I think of it, and I've described it in the past of a tank of pain. So, Rich, you've got your own tank. I've got my own tank. People watching this have got their own tank of pain. And you've been exposed to unique things in your life that have poured pain into that tank. Same for me. And then if we imagine that each of us have got this regulation pipe at the bottom that should help us take pain out of the tank if there's good regulation. But if we've got high exposure and poor regulation, our tank can get fuller and fuller. And then each of us, when we hit that threshold and that pain is just so full, I think each one of us under those sorts of conditions could start to think about suicide. And what I find so moving in the data is I think that we were looking at childhood experiences in about 700 men who'd been suicidal in the last week or year, and 79% of them first started thinking about suicide in childhood. So before you've even entered adulthood, your pain tank has already hit a point where you've gone, I don't know that I can endure this. And I remember reading a quote from a man in Canada who said something like he first started thinking about suicide at an age where a child doesn't even really understand what death is. I think that is a fucking devastating reflection on our modern societies, that we're allowing so many kids to emerge from childhood feeling like their pain tank is unbearably full. And then, the danger of something that comes up a lot in the research with men is thinking about that regulation pipe, so many things that you described as well of, of reaching for regulation tools that ultimately are just pouring pain back into your tank. So things like the drinking or drugs, fighting, sex, gambling, and literally being described to me by men, as you described it, as literally like anaesthetizing, pain relief. I can't cope with all of this, and so I just need to switch it off, shut it down. And then so you start then through the work to read those behaviours in completely different ways, and you start to look at men in different ways. So for example, I remember this was when I was doing my masters, and I was living up in Camden, and I'd met someone for a drink, and last orders went, and then there was a guy drinking by himself, and he went to the bar and he brought 3 pints, and he just absolutely downed them. And because the research had given me a different lens, I'm suddenly looking at him and I'm going, what are you dealing with? That you're needing to anaesthetize in this way, and that you're by yourself having to do it. And going back to that theme of somebody that's always been worried about people alone with their pain, that for me was exactly what I was sort of witnessing here with this guy. So yes, sorry, there's a bit of a convoluted way of just saying, that childhood really is a huge part of all of this for me. And I think, and I've said this before, that we have to be really, really specific when we're thinking about adversity in the lives of boys specifically. And there's double jeopardy that happens. Adversities in childhood are fucking shit. Like, irrespective of your gender, they're shit to deal with. To be exposed to high pain in childhood is brutal, but to be exposed to high pain in your environment, and then also to be culturally told, suppress that, keep it to yourself, cope with it by yourself, be self-reliant, be strong, it's going to be a weakness for you to show that pain, is fucking savage. And that's the double jeopardy that I think for men in particular who experience adversity in childhood can be left so brutally, emotionally isolated, with those experiences. And I think you said something earlier which was really, really important, because I think as well, everybody has to decide for themselves what they have capacity to cope with in that moment. And that is really critical. So when you were a kid, it wasn't necessarily going to be helpful for you to start there was no space for you to start processing what was happening for you. But actually, as you've gone into adult life, you've realised, no, this is necessary. This is a work that I need to start looking at this, because we need to. There's this wonderful man called Jamie who runs this group called Mandem Meetup, and he said to me once, making sense of the pain is such an important part of the healing journey. And I think that is so, so true. But there's a time and place. You need a certain amount of psychological, physical safety to start making sense of the pain. You didn't have that in childhood, and it wasn't available to you. So it wouldn't have been the time necessarily to start doing that work. But eventually you one hopes that people find some kind of safe place to land.
How do you find that? That feels like quite a hopeful thought. So how do people find that? Because you talk then about community. Yes. Tom Stroud, a guest that I've had on the podcast, who created a community called Shoulder to Shoulder.
Okay.
And already it's a wonderful online and offline community. Hundreds of people meet at these meetups. I know that many of these things happen. You've got the men's shed movement. You've got all these things that bring men together. But that's a massive step from the loneliness of, right now I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And we haven't really touched on loneliness. Obviously, lots of things out there, lots of conversations you've had out there, predominantly, around isolation and loneliness. But how do you take a step outside of yourself when you think you're not worthy, when you think you're not worth being part of a community? and get yourself to that walk. Tom Skinner, the ex-apprentice guy, the social media guy, you've probably seen him, the Bosch guy.
Big John.
Not Big John. I've had Big John on as well.
Have you?
He was wonderful.
Oh, I love Big John.
When I spoke to the other guy, the apprentice, the Cockney guy. So Big John, met him in Essex, and I was like, "Where do you want to meet?" And he went, "Oh, there's a fish and chip shop around the corner."
Fantastic.
So we ate fish and chips as we had our interview. Adorable human being, wonderful. Just like they need to make more Big Johns. And I was fascinated by the way that they tried to recently in the last few months kind of politicize Big John.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you remember the in light of the send the boats back type rhetoric. There was a Chinese restaurant that was vandalised.
Oh, yes.
Or a restaurant, sorry, that was vandalised. And, if you know anything of Big John, it's that he loves a bloody restaurant. He loves a Chinese and he loves a restaurant. And he was speaking out about, that's not who we are as British people. So then people were trying to paint him with this kind of reform, flag or target on his back. And he was like, no, I'm not that either. But, so I get back to Tom Skinner, he's doing like men's walks and things now. There's a lot of people that are trying to, invoke a sense of community and come out. But how do these men that you've spoken to and in your research, how do you encourage somebody to step outside of their happiness and their unhappiness and despair enough to make themselves part of these groups? Because we know that community is powerful. We
know that it's critical, absolutely, Rich. And I think that it's so difficult to know what psychologically is a Mount Everest for you to do, and what's a Mount Everest for me. Like for me, there's certain things that I've said out loud to another human being that I had to internally climb Mount Everest to get to be able to say those words out loud. Now, for me, going to a community group that might be happening in my area, that's just opening the front door and walking out. Whereas for somebody else, very fortunate, isn't it? Yeah. That's an absolute privilege to have. For somebody else, for the kid that went to school and got people chanting that they hated them. Oh God,
can you imagine that, opening the door to a new community and with the expectation that that's what they might do or say?
Exactly. That's a Mount Everest potentially for him to climb, and so I think there's. I'm now trying to develop future research projects that I want to take on. And one of them is really looking, because for me, the community space is absolutely critical. The having spaces, particularly where men can just meet and be with other men, is really, really sacred and important. And I think that there's really beautiful things happening in that space. But I think that there are also men not accessing it, men that are being left behind. I worry a lot, Rich, about men with disabilities, because I think that the suicide rate is so high in men in general, but I think it's 3 to 4 times higher with men with disabilities. Right? Wow. So I worry about the access issues around that, or what it is. I remember we were doing a study about barriers for men about accessing help, and this one guy said his social anxiety is such that in order for him to leave the house and go to an appointment, he would have to extensively self-harm in order to cope with the anxiety of leaving the house. And you go, fuck, okay, that then requires we need to do a whole new piece of thinking about this group of people and how we might be able to give them more access. So there's loads more work that we need to do to make sure that that to improve access for different people. What I will say, and maybe you can speak to this as well, and this may be to some extent irrespective of the reaction that I've had from others when I've climbed a Mount Everest, the reaction that I've been able to give myself of like, there's something that's so fucking, you can be high as a fucking kite, like, because you've shown yourself something that you didn't think was ever going to be possible for you. And that's why I think, I think we were talking earlier, we mentioned briefly about body image and stuff, and I agree. I think, I watch program. I see stuff on the TV. I say I don't watch Love Island, but no disrespect to Love Island. But when I see things, adverts and stuff, and I see these physiques and the amount of fucking work that, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think that gym and exercise there's so much medicinal property into that.
It's almost the best medicine sometimes.
It's a huge space of community and stuff like that. But I think that in some people, if it can become another self-harming mechanism. Absolutely. So there's always a kind of balance with it. But the thing that I've spoken about in the past, because in terms of body image to do with women, is in a way of trying to make women understand how ingrained and dangerous certain ideas have become for men, because that's what they've always been told, and to have more compassion for that. Because I think sometimes I see stuff where they go, well, just talk, just go and talk, and you think,
it's quite a common refrain from a woman that wants to on social media get a few likes for something,
right?
Do you know what I mean? Hey men, we care, talk, and it's the easiest way to be seen to be, kind of mobilised in support of men. But what does that? But not really necessarily do?
Having because I always make the comparison to, for me, for example, as a woman in the 90s, in terms of body image, all we were bombarded with was the idea of size 0. Mm-hmm. You had to be as thin as possible, and I was never a thin girl. So you then are absorbing all these negative ideas about yourself. And now that I'm 44 in 2026, we have this era of body positivity, and we celebrate women of all sizes and shapes. It doesn't, which is, I'm happy for, but it doesn't mean that I suddenly, and the women I know, suddenly feel tremendous about their bodies. Exactly, of ingrained messages. And it's the same with men in terms of talking. It's just because we're now saying it's okay doesn't mean that it still feels safe for men. I've remember again going back to that help seeking study we did. There was, for some men, there was this almost kind of like cultural lag between these old norms and these new norms. So some of the men were saying, I would never judge my friends for going and getting help. I totally think, do it, understand it, go for it, but I could never do it myself. So there's still this kind of like friction between what would be all right for other people to do, but not feeling like it's available for you. And I think that
I wonder what makes, there's an aspect to that. Therapy is an interesting topic for me, because I think that there's I think boys are very often treated like, and this isn't, I'm stealing this phrase, but kind of malformed girls, in education, particularly. I've seen it with my children going up through education. It's like, your standard compliant, brings you a drawing, every day girl who brings the teacher a drawing every day, miss, I drew you, Teachers bloody love those. Now, 83% of primary school teachers are women, and it's 70-something%, I forget the exact figure, in secondary school. Again, speaking to the fact that lots of boys, if they have a male in their school at all, it's one. At primary school, it's a couple. Maybe they do, or they don't have the for PE, maybe. And they're very often seen to be that kind of, they're the ones that come in and lay the law down. You do or don't do this thing. They're
authoritarian.
They're the authoritarian. Yeah. And that the idea of being a defective female, as a boy, where you're just, exhibiting, I don't know, gregarious kind of boyish behaviour. Maybe you are play fighting. Maybe you are, no, you're wrong. This girl over here, that's the ideal. I worry, and having been through some therapy, there's a feminized aspect to therapy that, how do I say this without sounding like a dick? It's like, it isn't one size fits all, and maybe I've just not had the, they always, it feels like a bit of a cop out to always say, well, maybe you just didn't get the right therapist, or therapists, or whatever. But there's I think that meme of, men will do literally anything but go to therapy.
Right, yeah.
Men will, go fishing rather than go, spend 9 hours on the riverbank, not catch anything, rather than go to therapy. It's like, maybe that is our therapy. You know,
Yeah.
have you watched like Mortimer and Whitehouse?
No, I've heard about it, the fishing program. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's absolutely stunning as a kind of précis of male friendship, and you know how hobbies contribute to them. 90% of that program is just them talking to each other about things that are going on in and around their lives. So I don't know, the idea that therapy is the silver bullet.
Yes, it can. Yeah, I think there's loads to say about that. I think that you absolutely have to find a therapist that you feel safe with, and that is a financial privilege, because often if you have the means to pay privately, then you can try out different
100%.
therapists. And I've definitely had therapists in the past where I was like, we don't vibe, check at all, and I was like, you are not somebody that I want to in any way intimately disclose to. And therapy for me, I remember I first went when I was 30, and I remember it was like a feeling of like I was using muscles in my throat that I'd never used before, because I grew up always with a lot of emotional suppression, and so I'd never really experienced talking. And I remember feeling like I was literally growing kind of new muscles. But so I do think that there is something about finding the right person, but again, I completely understand the financial luxury of that. I think that the way that we don't, there has to be changes to the system and the services, and we have to understand what different men want and need. I think it's really, really challenging if you've lived a life where you've had real interpersonal harm. So people have done bad things to you, and you've kept that pain to yourself for a really long time. You can't instantly go and sit in front of somebody and feel safe enough to start talking about what those things mean. One of the things that I love about community interventions is that there's time to build up the trust. I remember visiting a space up in Newcastle, and the guy that ran it was saying to me, they kind of had part of it was this drop-in cafe space. And he said that one of the guys came in for 2 years, never said anything to anyone, never sort of responded to attempts at engagement. And then one night they ran an open mic session. He brought his guitar down, he performed a song. And that was and then from then on, he started to be able to talk and open up to people. But he needed 2 years in the space, acclimatizing to it, telling himself, his nervous system, that this is a safe space to be in.
And also then communicating in a slightly different way.
Yes.
I mean, there's a wonderful story. I was speaking to a trustee of a bereavement charity as a friend, actually, nothing to do with the podcast, and he touched on a story of a young boy who just wasn't engaging in any of the support, didn't want to. Obviously, that's fine. You can't. But then he started kicking a football around with him a few weeks later.
Right.
This kid loved football.
Perfect.
Kicking a football around with him, and Jordan and I used to pass a ball around. We'd talk about everything in life. I'll touch on that again in a second. But kicking a ball around, and over time, the boy starts speaking. And so I go, do you like football? He's like, yeah, no, I love it, but I don't want to play anymore. So, why? He said his dad had taken his own life. And he said, because me liking football killed my dad. He was about 8 or 9. And my friend was like, well, I'm sure that's not true. What do you mean? Talk to me about that. And he said, well, I had football practice, and Mummy and Daddy were arguing, and I, wanted to go to football, and then basically what happened. And so that poor kid had kind of internalized the idea that his needing to go to football had caused this argument that it caused his dad to take his own life, and it took getting outside and kicking a football around just as it took this man to play a guitar to take that time. And obviously then once it's been kind of spoken out loud, you can work with that, and you can go, oh, you poor bloody thing, of course that's not why your dad did what he did. But you can imagine quite easily how a child might believe that to be the case. And kind of internalize that idea of, look, I'm the reason, because why wouldn't he think that? It almost makes logical, concise kind of sense that, well, A happened and B happened and C happened. So yeah, so obviously it's my playing football. Do you feel hopeful?
I do. Just to go back to your point about the importance of there's no one size fits all. I think that's really, really critical about in terms of supporting men, or men being given tools to better support themselves. I've spoken to men who've had horrendous experiences with therapy, horrendous experiences with medication. Other men where they've said that's what's saved their lives. They wouldn't be here without that. So I think that making space for all those different needs. What I would say is going back to that phrase that Jamie from Manda Meetup shared with me about the importance of making sense of your pain. I think that's critical. When the time is right, you need to be able to make sense of your pain. How you do that is completely up to the individual. But I think, for example, what you shared about your going to your partner's house now, if you hadn't started to make sense of your pain, you could have gone there, experienced their kind of directness and raised voices, been on edge and been like left and gone, your family are fucking awful, I hated that, I don't want to spend time with them. But because you've started to make sense of your pain, you're able to have a completely different conversation with her that keeps that all accessible, keeps you together.
And they are, again, I should say, just
lovely people,
enormously beautiful, wonderful. What a and I'm very lucky to have such a lovely kind of in-law family. But and he says, no, I'm joking. I really mean that. But no, you're right.
It makes sense what you're saying, that the raised voices and the directness has a completely different response in somebody with the history that you have. But because you've been on that journey of sense making, you're able now to make different decisions about, or have a different understanding about what's happening. And so I think that that's really, really important when the time is right for you to be able, and nobody gets there quickly. Like I did some therapy when I was 30 and did some sense making, and then I did some more therapy when I was 41 and did some more sense making, and maybe I'll do some more in the future. And maybe therapy, you can't afford it, or it's just not for you, then maybe it's about watching stuff on YouTube, reading books, having conversations with people, not necessarily even sharing, but just listening and then reflecting.
I mean, we talked about James's Place earlier on, and organisations like that, and I guess signposting is an important part of this conversation, is to say, I had the director, Amanda from Samaritans, on in this series. Phenomenal work. It's knowing that the pain that I've gone through, as I say, one of the people left behind, and how much of me he took with him is enormous. And just to say to anybody listening or watching that feels like, do you know what, I do feel this way. That's why I'm checking this content out. That's why I'm trying to make sense of how I feel. It's like, please know that you're so much more than you think you are. Yeah. And there are services out there, maybe let's talk to government and what they're doing about it. There's the Minister for Men, that's happening, right? There's
a men's health strategy that's happening.
Talk to me about that, and let's talk about
positive.
Well, I mean, is it positive? Do you think they're going far enough? Do you think that, obviously your research is extensive, potentially more extensive than lots of the research that's otherwise been put in front of the government, in and around this? I feel like they should be talking to you endlessly about your experience and your research here. What's actually happening in the UK to prevent? I mean, what the statistics themselves? Like, do you want to speak to statistics? How many men a day are taking their own lives?
I think it's something like, and I may get this wrong, but I think it's between something like 5,500 or 6,000 a year in the UK of male suicides. Certainly it's something like 3/4 of all deaths by suicide are male, which again is a pretty consistent pattern that we see around the world. So there's indisputably an aspect to the behaviour of suicide that is gendered, whereby men are at a higher risk of dying by suicide. It doesn't mean that people of all genders don't feel suicidal pain at times. As I said, I felt it at times. But in terms of those at risk of dying, it's men.
And what's been done about that?
I mean, I know you want to be hopeful, and I can't. I struggle to be, because I am fucking furious that more isn't being done. I think that there's a real poverty of moral courage from political leadership who are responsible for governing a group of people. Within that group of people, half of the population, the biggest risk for them before they turn 50 is their own pain. That's incumbent on those with power and influence and finances to do something about it. So from a political standpoint, I'm not saying that there aren't valuable things that are happening, but I'm not a political animal, Rich. I don't have the patience. I want people to do the right thing now because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And I understand there are financial complications, yada, yada, yada. But people that are afraid to speak out about the need to be... the needs that men have, and the fact that they should have some priority, I can't abide by a lack of people displaying a lack of courage around that.
Well, if I could just speak anecdotally about the system as I saw it, as somebody picked up the phone to support, in hopeful support of Jordan, days before he took his own life. I think it was a Wednesday, the 5th of February, that I called them. I called a local mental hospital and said, please take him in. Like, I'm begging you. Now, this is probably the wrong thing to do, but I'm at my wit's end. We've already done all the therapy that money can buy and all of these things, and, all the support that I could we could otherwise muster as a family. I called them, please take him in, he's going to hurt himself. Yeah. And I know he is. I just know him. He's tried before. Yeah. He was unsuccessful. He got, probably, I know you shouldn't talk about methods, but, was found and stopped. That was a couple of years before. I said, he will do it. And they said, well, is he in the act of doing it now? And I said, no, but I know him, he will, please help. And they said, well, if he's not doing it right now, we can't help. Call crisis. And they said very, very similar things. They effectively said, look, I've heard that, sometimes they'll come out and they'll do an assessment, these things, but, he was already kind of known, and effectively it was just swept under the carpet a tiny bit. And I've spoken to other people who've had waiting list issues and things like that, and have then taken their life before they get to even close to being seen. And it just feels like such a kind of again, abdication of any. It's not responsibility of any care. It's like, I'm literally telling you, I'm begging you, and if I could listen to the call, it'd probably be incredibly painful to listen to, because I know how it would have been. I'm begging you. Is he doing it now? How can you say that to a human being and about a human being, about somebody that is right there? I'm telling you, I know he is, and then 2 days later he's taken his own life, and again, people like James's Place shouldn't have to pick up the slack. That should be afforded to us as a society by a system that we all pay into, by a system that that is happy to sling money in certain areas and certain directions, and for certain ideologies and certain objectives. And that's not me, again, trying to remain as apolitical as possible here, but where the problem is fundamental, with is an issue as serious and painful and fatal as this. What the fuck are we doing? Why are you not supporting this more? Like, is it because men don't deserve it? I'd hope that nobody would say yes. Is it because it's not a big enough problem? Well, I think we identified that it fucking is. It really is. So what is it? And at the very, very least, it could be, let's really tackle that, to reduce waiting lists. Let's make it so it's immediate. You're telling me you need help? Okay, cool. Yeah. Come in. Yeah. Look, we'll provide a space for you. Because that's, they say that they said about suicide, that you don't want to end your life, you want to end your life right then. Yeah. You want to end your life at that moment in time. Yeah. because it feels unbearable to live. You can't imagine living beyond it. And then you speak to people that have felt suicidal, as you have very much, and you hear that they're almost glad that they got through that moment. Where they feel like, okay, I felt that way, and I'm proud of myself that, you know, I didn't end it then. Or you know, in attempts that aren't successful. Successful's the wrong word, but
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Attempts that, you know, don't result in that person losing their life. There's I'm glad that I didn't, because I don't want to die. I just don't want to be here right now.
Yeah.
So that's what we're asking, is when those people call you and they beg for that support, and that person doesn't want to be here right now, take it seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and what does that mean? Well, you know, if you know, again, I'm no economic mind, but, you know, I know, you know, I've been successful in and around business well enough, and these people that are, you know, controlling the purse strings of where money's getting sent, clearly they just don't, it has to be that they don't give it enough kind of weight. They don't care enough. Like, it has to be. When I was speaking to Mike McCarthy, he said, he talks about a zero suicide society. I don't know how much I could buy into the notion of a zero suicide society, but he says it's a political choice to, you know, to ensure that suicide remains at the levels that it is. That's a powerful thing to say, but I don't disagree. I think it is a political choice that we're not supporting, because if it was, then when I made that call, they'd have said, absolutely, where is he? Let's come and help. You know, because the alternative is, and this is not, I've heard this story multiple times now, people I've spoken to, it's not just Jordan. It's not just, you know, Mike's son Ross.
Yeah.
It's, you know, innumerable. How many of those 5,500, 6,000 people a year reached out for help? I've seen the statistics, it's high.
Yeah.
Many of them called and, you know, wanted support and weren't afforded it.
I mean, I can only I've known women in suicidal crisis who's made attempts, and we have not got the help that we've needed, and similarly been kind of essentially left to drown. And I think that
that's a good point. Let's take gendered aspects away from it. Let's take, you know, I know a lot of this has been about male mental health and male suicide. Of course, it's your area of expertise. Like suicide in general. Hey, my brother, sister, mum, dad needs help right now.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's in 3 weeks' time. Cheers.
Yeah.
You know, we both know where that's going to end.
Yeah.
If, you know, if left unchecked. If somebody's listening to this, watching this, and feels, this is a heavy question, and feels close, like, do you know what, it's tonight, what would you want to say to them?
If they
were listening to this, watching this, and thought, do you know what, I've decided, whatever, you know, tonight's the night.
Okay.
What would you want to say to them?
That is a big question.
You have all the experience of the conversations you've had, and these people that have felt that way and then haven't done it, and, you know, they're hopefully, I would assume, in many cases, happy with the fact that they're still here. Like, what?
Things can be different, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would just say, and I think that you would share in this sentiment of how sorry we feel that somebody is in that level of pain, because it is a brutal, brutal level of pain, and it hasn't happened overnight. It has a historical context which suggests that probably a lot of difficult and challenging things have happened to you, and the fact that somebody's been, you know, had to endure that and got to the point where they feel that there's no alternative for them except ending their lives it's a shame on a species that in any way thinks that it might be civilized, you know, because I say this a lot of, like, there's things that kill us like cancer or dementia, or Parkinson's, where we are limited by science to know how to keep people alive with certain conditions. But things like suicidal pain that so often stems from a lack of meaningful connection, a lack of ability to tolerate yourself, which often comes because of things that have happened to you by other people that have caused you to feel that way, or feeling ill-equipped to cope with the feelings that you're feeling. when we've created modern societies where people are allowed for their psychological tectonic plates to become that disrupted, and when it is in particular, when we know that disruption can so frequently end in very specific earthquakes for men, I don't understand where the collective reflection on how that can be allowed to be. I can't understand why all of us aren't being like, I don't want to participate in that kind of world. I want to contribute to something that can be different, because all of us are or the majority of us are in relation to men that we really, really care about and want things to be different. So what I would say to somebody struggling is to really recognise that pain and recognise how fucking awful it is to be in it. I think one of the things that's been most helpful for me on a personal level, and I say this kind of really respectfully because I know that you, it may be difficult to hear, but one of the theories around suicide that really helped me was this guy called David Rudd, who has this, it's called the fluid vulnerability model of suicide. So it's a very wordy name, but the idea is that basically the way I make sense of it is that, like, your suicidal feeling, it's like a storm, and the sort of the fluidness of it is that it cannot sustain itself. No storm has lasted indefinitely. Mm-hmm. There's always a break. There's always a dawn that comes. And so his sort of idea is that the intensity of the feeling of suicidal pain is so much that your body cannot sustain it indefinitely. So there will be moments, like a cycle of reprieve. So the way I think about it is to imagine someone in the gym lifting a really heavy weight. Now, you're way stronger than me. You could lift a bigger weight and hold it for longer. But even you at some point, Rich, would have to put the weight down because you're just not built. We're not built to hold that kind of weight indefinitely. And that's how I think about suicidal pain. It doesn't mean that when you put the weight down, my pain's gone. It just means that your body is having a moment of recovery. And in that moment of recovery, you suddenly get, even if it's tiny, the window, you get some reprieve. When you're holding the weight, it's so consuming, and you can feel like the only way to end all of this is just I want it gone, and so I just want to sort of obliterate myself. But in those moments of having to put the weight down, there can be these moments of reprieve, and in those moments of reprieve, there can be a crack of a different thought. Of maybe there's another, kind of alternative other than, Rich, it's difficult to speak to this because I desperately want everybody to stay here. I want so much for everybody to stay here. And I want you to never have accrued the amount of pain that's got into your tank. And I wish, and I know that you will have experienced this over and over, when the people that you love have high pain tanks, you wish you could physically just scoop it, get into that tank and fucking scoop it out, because you do anything to protect the people that you love. And having to live with the powerlessness of not being able to do that is so, so difficult. So at the same time, I don't want to in any way kind of diminish how brutal it is for, the things that certain people have been exposed to in their lives. But I will say that over and over again, I'm really privileged in this work to meet men who've been in that storm multiple times. They might still be going back into that storm now at times in their current lives, but they've been, in the moments that they're out of the storm, they're able to learn new strategies for how to cope when they're in the storm. So for me, for example, there's almost like two levels of intervention. There's stuff about how do you stop, if you think about that pain tank, how do I improve my regulation tools, and how do I stop being exposed to so much pain? so that my tank never reaches a threshold. Now, I say that respectfully, Rich, because there's certain situations where it's out of your hands for the pain exposure to be reduced. So, for example, I think about when I've spoken to dads who don't have access to their kids. Like, that's just an ongoing exposure to pain. So for them, it's potentially more about how do I learn to cope with that better.
And that's its own grief.
Same with grief, exactly.
I mean, that's its own grief, that's its own grief, and then the same with grief.
The same with grief. And so that's one level of kind of like regulation. And then there's about what do I do when my pain's at the threshold? And all I'm seeing now for me is the pain. It's surrounding me. And I think figuring out when you're in those moments of crisis what works for you, and it's going to look different for every person, but sometimes it's really simple things. Like for me, it's looking at my hands. The last time I felt really afraid of what I was feeling, I had to leave the apartment. I had to go and take a walk. And even as I was walking, I was still kind of like feeling kind of almost out of body with how intrusive these thoughts were. And then it was just standing and looking at my hands. And that experience brought me back to my body. I can drift off so much into my head of like, and into the feeling, I lose the connection of I'm a physical being. And when I looked at my hands, I was like, I don't want to hurt myself. And so now I've kind of got that in my toolkit. So I think, okay, the next time that maybe I go into that storm, maybe this is a useful tool for me specifically. It's not necessarily going to work for everyone, but it's collecting the data about what works for you. How can I make sense of my pain and cope with it? Which is going to be individual for, each person.
I think one thing I'd also like to say, I mean, that's brilliant what you've just said, like phenomenal, thank you. One thing I'd like to say is you hear a lot the notion that it would be better, people would be better off without me.
Right. Yeah.
Is something, I mean, did you hear that in your research?
Yeah.
That notion that, I'm a burden, I shouldn't, like it would almost be easier, like, it would be pain for a moment, but then I'm not here anymore, and that protracted pain that I maybe have caused, and I'm speaking from experience here, obviously, of like, hearing things and looking Jordan in the eye when I knew that he didn't want to be here, and that feeling of him thinking, I know it'd be easier if I wasn't here. And that's obviously the thing I want to say to anybody listening is that's just not true.
Yeah.
You can't possibly know the pain that you leave behind.
Yeah.
And how much of other people you take with you when you do make that decision. And that notion that it's selfish is fucking obviously bullshit.
Yeah.
I think it's possibly one that, like to them it's the most selfless thing in the world is I'm burdening people of the pain of having to almost put up with me. But the reality is the people left behind are just so fragmented, so broken that you can never fix those people ever again. And you have to try and find a life that exists where that person doesn't anymore. And I speak, like if it's not a guilt, this isn't intending to engender any guilt in anybody that might feel this way, but like it's impossible to look your mum in the eye having lost her son to this and feel in any way like he would have wanted that, because he didn't. And like that thing sometimes, like I wrote something the other day and I don't know if I'll share it or not, but the idea that I, without him here, I don't deserve to feel happiness, and I don't, and those things. And that sounds like I'm being bloody, pity me. And it's not. That's such an intrinsic feeling of how dare I feel. It took me bloody ages to get back in the gym because we used to train a lot together, because his footprints on the, footprints on the floor, the gym floor. You can. I got one of his PlayStation controller that just smells of him, and those things. There were save games. Back on the PlayStation, there were messages between us from when he was 14.
Wow.
Like, and again his note to me that said to the dad I never had, and it's just like how do you fathom that? How do you put all these things together? And I just want anybody to know that it's not you're not improving anybody's life by not being here.
Yeah.
You are. and this shouldn't, this isn't don't do it because of this, but I just wish people would appreciate, there's so much pain and fragmentation of people that exists afterwards. It's not just this happens and then it's done and then life's better for everybody around me.
Yeah, it's never the case.
And I think people imagine that, in your darker moments, if you ever thought, I'd probably be better if I wasn't here, for the people that I love.
I haven't had that thought, but I am aware that when you're in that feeling, how quickly you can lose sight of the people that love you, and how quickly you can disconnect from any awareness of the consequences for others of you not being there.
Because I was talking to my 8-year-old the other day, and she said it's really sad that Jordan didn't feel loved. And I said, I was like, Jordan knew he was loved.
Yeah.
Like his eulogy, I started with it like, if love could have saved him, he'd still be here.
Yeah.
But yeah, for an 8-year-old Stacey, it's really, and again, it's wonderful because we've clearly done something right. She couldn't fathom again how you wouldn't love yourself. And it's a wonderful thing of an 8. But again, we've done well, because at 8, I certainly didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
Well, years later, whatever. But and I just had to say, sometimes it's not that he didn't know that he was loved; it's that he didn't love himself enough. And I wish that wasn't the case, because clearly he was very, very, very loved. But yeah, it's the that conversation will come up in 5 years' time, 10 years' time with my daughter, with my children. It's the we're still going through all the firsts at the time of recording. When this goes out, it'll be it's the first of the worst is the is the thing that people are saying. We're still going through it all, and I don't know. It's just this is a rambling soliloquy of sadness, I guess. Of like, just please know that the people you leave behind aren't in any way better, in any way. The pain is enormous, and what you've done is you've taken. It's almost like what he's done is he's taken the pain that he felt and he's just spread it among us. And if that's true, then Jesus, what pain he must have been feeling. To divide it among us equally or unequally, maybe. But So anyway,
Rich says, I mean, what you've said, I also see. Have a lot of contact with bereaved families as well through this work as well, and absolutely, I've not met one person who felt that wouldn't do anything to change the situation. I think, is it Paddy the baddie?
Yeah, Paddy Pimblett, Paddy the baddie,
who said that quote about he said something like...
He was talking about suicide recently.
Yeah, and he was saying that he said something like, there's no phone call from you that I wouldn't want to take to know how you are more than attending your funeral, something along those kind of those lines. And I think that's and Rich, that's of course what's so heartbreaking about it.
That's absolutely right.
You would have done anything for your brother, and we could often do more for others than we know how to do for ourselves, right? And learning to apply some of that to ourselves can be really, really difficult.
Sorry. Because some of these questions, and I read them, and this can stay as quite funny. That just seems so trite now, when you look at them on paper, and it's such an enormous topic. I mean, I think we're privileged to have people like you dedicating yourself to it, at detriment to your own bloody, finances and things like that.
It's definitely been a financial hit doing this work, but emotionally, spiritually, it's been. It's been the biggest blessing of my life, without doubt. And I suppose also thinking about anybody listening that is in a lot of pain, is that I think often people can feel quite isolated and alone with that. And I think, and I hope that at least by virtue of this conversation happening, like two human beings, I know that you are immensely worried about those people. That's why we're taking the time to sort of speak to them directly, and that's my work is all about, trying to how can we better come alongside people in that pain. So even though it doesn't diminish what's being felt, I hope at least energetically there's some feeling of connection between us and whoever is.
Yeah, absolutely. That somebody watching, listening to this, just feels less alone for that the conversation being had. We know how we know the pain that they're feeling and the pain that can, and what that looks like and the ramifications of it, I guess. Where should people go if they do want to speak to somebody?
I think in a way it's such a personal question of what feels accessible to you. So like, for example, and I'm not saying, I can't guarantee that every surface you access or contact is going to be a good one, but obviously there's crisis lines like Samaritans. There is all these amazing community intervention spaces now, like an Andy's Club, like a Talk Club. But going back, I'm thinking as well as what we spoke about earlier of the struggles for some men to be able to, the Everest they've got to climb to kind of get to those spaces. So the biggest thing in a way, like I would love for everybody to find somebody safe to speak to, and where there is an abundance of humans in this world, but also part of this is about learning to speak safely to yourself and learning in those moments of crisis, it's in a different way, but like going back to the earlier, what I was saying about the like, Susie, you're a cunt for, I can speak to myself with that voice, or the voice that says enough, we don't. And so learning when you're in the crisis to also speak to yourself and say, yes, we're in pain, but we've been here before and we didn't want to make, and we're glad we didn't make certain decisions. So also, it doesn't always necessarily have to be about finding someone, but getting that pain out is so, it can just, I remember one guy who was planning on killing himself, and then his friend asked for a lift from the airport in 2 weeks' time, and so suddenly he was like, okay,
I have to be okay because I need to support that person. What keeps you doing this despite how heavy it can be?
What keeps me doing it is I'm just off the record. It's hard to answer that. It's funny that I'm hesitating because I think because at the moment I don't know that I can keep doing it because my funding runs out next month. So I might well be in a position of having to go and get a job. So not doing it. So it's quite.
What keeps you motivated and caring about this enough that you devote your time to it?
It's so hard, Rich, because it feels like it's in every fibre of me now. And I think that, like, if I was working if there was an abundance of people researching male suicide and I thought that there was lots of us, there was lots of funding for it, and the work was all brilliant, I would probably say, I'm going to go and live in the woods because that's quite what I would like to do.
Nice, right?
But, there's more researchers moving into the space, which is fantastic. And there's been some incredible researchers in the past. But the imbalance is still now so enormous. And I couldn't leave men alone at this point. I can't. I don't. And I don't say, I don't want to be like, I don't think, I don't know how to say it other than, Rich, like, I love them too much. I have enormous affection for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
In the time that we've spent together, I meet this beautiful, dazzling, dignified man who's endured things I cannot even imagine, and you've kept incredible depths of humanity, to be through the brutal things that you've been, and to hold on to the fullness of your heart and the enormity of it, which you feel just being in your presence.
I'm quite a dickhead as well. I hope
I'm
that
a
helps.
cunt. So
Yeah.
we're all in balance. Don't worry. But it's like, I wouldn't. Before I did this work, I didn't. My life was starved to some extent of that richness of relational, emotional connection with men, and I think that I meet so many, or have contact with so many men who are suicidal, who deserve, Rich, so much better than what they've experienced in life. Now, they probably would find it very difficult to accept that idea of themselves.
I touched on therapy earlier on. The one thing that really that sticks with me still now is being asked to look at a young Rich. So
Right.
Picture, like think of yourself, right now, young Susie, young Rich, does that person deserve the things that are happening to and around them? And that's a fucking powerful way to go. No.
Yeah.
No. Does Jordan deserve to have felt the way he felt? Look, I can visualize him at that age, every age. Does he deserve to feel the way that he eventually felt? No.
Yeah.
And that's quite a powerful tool, I think. So for anybody listening or watching that's really in a bad place, picture yourself as a young child right now. Does that person deserve love? Does that person deserve what's happened or is happening, or whatever to yourself? No, like you do deserve love, and those things shouldn't have happened to you, around you, and you deserve to be here. You deserve to take up the space that will be so fucking sorely missed when you don't inhabit it anymore. Because I know what that feels like. I remember the last hug I gave to Jordan, and I remember thinking, this is the last one.
You knew at the time.
I walked away from it. It was 2 days before, 36 hours before he did it, and I remember the feeling of it, and just and I literally just said to him in the car, I was like, please don't do anything. Please just know that how much I love you, and so it's almost like the closure of knowing that I'd said that, and and then obviously there was the note from him and things like that, which painful, and I know lots of people don't leave notes, so at least I was grateful for that. And we all got one, but just that idea. Look at yourself as a young child, picture yourself. I'm sure you can do it, and does that child deserve what you're feeling right now? Definitely not. We all deserve more, and should so yeah, I think that's probably quite a powerful way I would hope to close it. I always ask people, Susie, to complete the question.
By the way, Rich.
Oh, thank you. No, Christ, thank you. I mean, it's a wonderful way of looking at life and thinking. We were all children once.
Yeah.
And I'm a big one for those, those things. There's a time where you pick your kid up for the last time. There's a time where you go call for your mate the last time. There's a time where you and again, the older you get, the more you reflect and think, oh fucking hell, like those moments are powerful. My eldest, or my son who's now 14, it's like, when was the last time I picked them up? Of course I'm not about to do it now, but there are times, and there's so yeah, that I think that's hopefully quite a powerful way of looking at it. It is Project Possible. The whole thing is what's truly possible. And for us, is it possible to bloody help men in their hour of need? Is it possible to help men stop taking their own lives in such enormous numbers? That's, I guess why we're having this conversation. Can you complete this sentence for me, please? Anything is possible if...
Anything is possible if... I mean, the first thing that came into my mind without thinking about it was there's love. But I can't say that... I would say many things are possible when there's love. But of course, that comes with complicated caveats. The thing is, Rich, I'm a chronic overthinker, and you're asking...
Hey, me too. I'm not defining you. Your very existence doesn't get defined by your answer to this question.
Yeah. Anything is possible. Maybe when there's hope. I always think of this story because I think I said to you earlier that I spent some time in Israel, Palestine when I was younger, and I went to meet a psychotherapist who works with survivors from the Holocaust. And he was saying to me a story that this man had told him who'd been in one of the concentration camps and told this experience of when another member of the camp gave him a small piece of bread. They were all obviously like starving. And how the act of receiving that bread didn't sate his physical hunger in any way, because it just wasn't big enough. But it sated in a way this kind of emotional hunger to know that humanity, there was still some goodness to humanity, some care, some protection. And I think so often about that small piece of bread and what the act of just giving that small piece of bread can do for another human being, and that we all carry that medicinal, emotional pieces of bread that we can kind of share with one another. And I have to say that this work is a reciprocal act. Like, I try through the work to kind of, I want things to be different for men, so I'm trying to make things different, but I also I've been given so much rich that I can't even put into words. It's made me whole as a human being, to all the incredible, beautiful men that I've met through this journey, all of whom have had dark nights of the soul, and they're still here, and they're still being living in this beautiful humanity that may at moments still be full of pain and facing really, really complicated things, but they're still looking for ways, like I said, with these emails saying, how can I help? Every message I get, how can I help? They're still looking for ways that they can be that piece of bread to somebody else. And that for me that's all I need to know, Rich, to keep me going, and to feel so privileged to be part of the work. When I think about the men that I work with, I feel the richest person alive in terms of, how much what this experience has given me. When I think about the politics and I think about the social conversation and the way certain institutions are run, I feel rage and frustration and more complicated things. So you're always, in doing this work, kind of inhabiting a quite emotionally diverse situation, and then of course just the worry that people will be okay. But so I don't, when you were saying anything is possible if for some reason something in that piece of bread, and the giving of the piece of bread in the worst of circumstances, still finding the humanity to take care of others. And I just want to end by saying there are people up and down the United Kingdom sharing bread in all sorts of different ways. What you're trying to do with the podcast, with these different community interventions. Yes, services can be fucking awful, but you've still got human beings turning up every day, wanting to try and share that bread with people that are struggling. And so there's so much kindness and love in this country, and in people. And I think it's easy sometimes to get lost in the bleakness of things, but that gives me a lot of like hope and courage, and and I hope this isn't inappropriate to say, but I take from our conversation, what you've shared to me today, not only some of your heart with me, but Jordan's too, and the feeling now that I go forward with the things that I want to do to try and, I sort of take a bit of his in memory of him now, part of this work is, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that. I thank you. Anything is possible if there's hope.
Yeah. And yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you. Susie, it's been beautiful.
It's
wonderful.
been wonderful,
thank
Rich.
you.
How long have we been chatting?
Oh God,
It's got dark.
It's got dark. I fear that we probably could do that again. So maybe we will. Yeah, maybe we will at some point. It's what a strange kind of aspect of our machine that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and possibly in 5 years' time you won't be able to stop it.
Kick in,
right? Because I know that's to a degree, especially in the last year. Anything and everything can bloody bring me to tears right now. And I think I've done very well on this. I thought I was going to cry many times, so I'm glad I haven't. But no, I'm grateful. We'll find a rugby game to bring you to. Okay, cool. Susie, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for making time.
Pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
And we are back. I know it was a heavier episode. If you've got this far, it means something to you. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'll be back next week with a slightly lighter-hearted episode. And in the meantime, stay strong. I never meant that more than I mean it just now. Something I used to say to my brother. It then became a tattoo that we both have and share. Kia kaha in Maori means stay strong. And it's something I used to say to him over and over again. And it means something. So, it feels authentic for me to say that, So, please do. And I'll see you next week. Go follow. Oh, yeah. Go follow us. Go follow Susie. Go follow Dr. Susie Bennett on everything you can get your hands on. LinkedIn, Instagram, all that jazz. She's wonderful.